Welcome everyone. Glad to see you on my channel. Today I will tell you about an unusual story, an amazing story about companionship and love. I wish you a pleasant audience.
"Calm him down," yelled a disgruntled lady on the train. The father's reply made the whole carload of. When Selena was just about to leave the house with her husband Harvey, someone rang the doorbell. She did not hurry to open the door, as she is in a hurry to visit family friends. Time is very short. She has to stop by to buy presents. It seemed that the unexpected guest was not going to leave. The calls became more insistent. Selena ran to the door, peered through the peephole, and exclaimed loudly, "Oh my God!" She hurried to open the door. In front of her stood her son Mickey. "Mom, I thought you weren't home." "Come in, son. Why are you like this? You should have warned me. Your father and I almost went to visit. Casey, come on in." "Mom, I'd like you to meet Casey, my wife. I told you about her. So we decided to surprise you and sign her ourselves." Mickey shocked his parents with his announcement. Selena thought for a moment, trying to remember when Mickey had talked about this Casey. He talked about a lot of girls, but Selena didn't remember much about Casey in particular. In front of her stood a short, full-figured girl with dyed hair and dark circles under her eyes. Selena wasn't particularly thrilled, but now was not the time to show it. Harvey, look who's here." Selena escorted her son and her daughter-in-law into the living room. Harvey, who had already spent an hour in front of the mirror trying to tie his tie, was overjoyed to see his son. "That's news. Mother, our son has a knack for surprises. If he'd been half an hour late, we'd have had to stand at the door until evening." "How are you, my son? Welcome home." Harvey greeted his son warmly, then looked questioningly at Casey, who was a little embarrassed, and said hello. "It's Walker's anniversary today. My mother and I are going to see them. Are you coming with us, or are you going to stay home and rest?" Harvey asked. "No, Dad. You go and have fun, and we'll get some rest," Casey said Mickey. "Well, as you wish. The main thing is not to be bored here without us," said Selena, and hurried her husband. As soon as the married couple left the apartment and the door closed behind them, Selena said to her husband, "Have you seen, what's going on? Who the hell is this Casey girl? He says he told me about her, and I don't remember anything. But I don't like that girl. She don't even look like Mickey. Look at him. He's handsome, well-mannered, and this girl doesn't impress me." Selena started to grumble. "Mother, stop it. Mickey's a big boy. He can decide what he wants to do with his life. What's it to you and me? Let him live his life. Let him make his own choices. A girl's just a girl to me. I'm talking about you," Harvey said, and laughed. As the celebration at Walker's was drawing to a close, a tipsy Harvey made a toast. "It was a good holiday today. I want to continue it. You, Maria, and Alexander are celebrating 30 years of life together, and on the same day, we learned that a new cell of society has appeared in our circle. To be more precise, our Mickey brought a bride into the house. So in a week's time, we'll be expecting the same group of people at our house. Congratulations and wishes in honor of Maria and Alexander smoothly flowed to Selena and Harvey. The guests gladly accepted the proposal to celebrate the marriage of Mickey and Casey in a week in a small circle of friends. The next day, Selena's family had a closer encounter with Casey. Selena kept trying to convince herself that her vague doubts about Casey's unworthiness of her son were just her usual maternal reaction. She'd asked a lot of questions of Casey and was convinced that she was a typical girl, not a bad character, and Harvey had reassured her. A week later, the family was ready to welcome guests to the restaurant. Family friends were toasting and presenting their gifts. Mickey sat quietly in the corner of the table accepting congratulations, while Casey was off and back again. As the event neared the halfway point, Selena noticed that Casey was becoming quite talkative, and after a while, she let go of controlling her behavior. Now she was bravely telling obscene jokes and drinking with her father-in-law's friends. When Selena tried to admonish her, Harvey gestured that it was okay. Young, let them have fun. So what if she had a little too much to drink amidst the excitement, said Harvey. Amidst the excitement. And Cindy and Natalie will be saying tomorrow that Mickey brought some alcoholic into the house, and they'll be right. A girl's got to know how to behave in public. I don't think anyone taught that girl how to behave in public, Selena hissed. When the guests were leaving, Casey couldn't stand on her own. Mickey tried to take her home as fast as he could, but she resented him for some reason and made her own complaints. All of this was happening in front of her parents. Selena could barely contain her emotions. The next day, Selena got up early as usual to make breakfast for the whole family. She went to the refrigerator, clearly unable to say hello to her mother-in-law, opened the door, found nothing for her hangover, and closed it again with a clatter. Casey, is something wrong? Selena tried to break the uneasy silence. I don't feel well. Where's the store around here? She asked, and Selena could smell the sharp odor of booze in her face. The store is in the courtyard, on the first floor of this house, answered the mother-in-law. You should have known better, and it's not proper to get drunk in front of guests, she added. But Casey didn't hear these words, because she had already left the door of the apartment, leaving it open. A few minutes later, while the pancakes were frying, Selena watched from the kitchen window as Casey came out of the store with a bottle of beer in her hands, sat on a bench in the yard, and smoked. As the next pancakes were being fried, she saw Harry, the neighbor's idle and drunken son, sit down next to Casey on the bench, and they began to chat animatedly. At the same time, another family was facing the dilemma of a daughter-in-law. The Weasley Seven's son John recently finished his studies at a prestigious university and got a job right away as an executive. John's mother, Mallory, had long dreamed of his wedding, so she began to rush with renewed vigor to get her son engaged in his personal life. Her son had no problems with his personal life. John has been dating Julia for a long time. They know each other well and do not imagine their lives apart. Therefore, John, not thinking long, offered Julia to move in with him. He promised that soon they would go to his parents in his native land. He would introduce them to them, and at the same time, they would determine the date of the wedding. When John arrived home with Julia, Mallory too looked on with great bewilderment. John, what about Angelica? She loves you so much. She's been waiting for your attention for a long time. It's a fine family, decent people, and they've known you since you were a child, said Mallory to John while Julia was in the kitchen. Mom, Angelica and I are just friends. She's nice, she's beautiful, but nothing can happen between us. Julia and I have been dating for 5 years. I can't imagine my life without her. I'm sure you'll like her very soon too, John said. John, we're not the kind of people who can let our feelings get in the way of sentimentality. You should have realized that my father and I are in business for life, and it's going to be in your hands soon. For this system to work as it has in the past, we need reliable connections in the government. Your father has served his time in the civil service. He's about to retire, and he'll probably be replaced by Frank, Angelica's father. Close ties with that family would guarantee our position, of course, and your welfare above all. That's why Angelica is the best match for you, Mallory continued to insist. Mom, my well-being depends only on me. I've got a good education, I have a good job, and I can achieve everything without sacrificing my happiness. If you want Frank, then be friends with him directly, without sacrificing the fate of your children. I'm sure Angelica probably feels the same way, John said. Then Mallory went back into the kitchen and looked at Julia setting the table so diligently. That girl is a good-looking girl. She had definitely received a good upbringing from her parents. She knew how to behave in public. She was polite and caring. A little later, she decided to discuss it with her husband Jacob. Jacob is a man with a lot of life experience and understanding of the realities of life. His many years of experience in leadership positions have helped him to become an insightful person. Jacob, you should talk to your son. Why feed a girl false hope? She's probably already fantasizing about marriage and a future with him. It's time to let her know that's not gonna happen. John has a purpose in life, and that purpose is to further our cause, and he needs to do everything he can to fulfill that purpose, including getting close to Frank, Valentina said. What does he say? Jacob asked. What? He says he loves this Julia, that he's going to make a career for himself on his own so Frank and I can find another way to keep in touch and other selfishness. He's young. He doesn't understand a lot of things in life. He doesn't know how to deal with reality. He won't listen to us anyway, Jacob said blankly. So if we don't stop him, he'll do whatever he wants because he's young. That's why I'm telling you to talk to him. Otherwise I'll talk to Julia myself, and things will be much tougher, said Mallory. Mother, don't you dare upset the young ones. Why would you do that? She's someone else's child too, and I'll talk to my son. Jacob reassured her. The doorbell rang, and Cecilia, the Weasley Seven's youngest daughter, ran to open it. She looked through the peephole and shouted toward her parents, "It's Lenka." Jacob and Mallory looked at each other in silence. Angelica will be surprised to see Julia so diligently setting the table in the kitchen. Angelica is Frank's only daughter. She and John went to the same daycare, went to the same school. She's always liked John. Even after Angelica studied abroad for 5 years and returned, she still has warm feelings for John. Angelica, you're just in time. We're having a family dinner, Cecilia said and smiled enigmatically. Jacob, Mallory, hello. Dad says hi. Angelica was standing on the living room doorstep the next second, smiling her radiant smile. Hello, Angelica. Health to your parents, she heard back from John's parents. Thank you, Mallory. I heard that Oleshka came from the city. Angelica smiled enigmatically. Angelica, and I will sit on the balcony. Cecilia adequately assessed the situation and tried to take Angelica away to gently prepare her to meet the new member of the family. Angelica and Cecilia were like two sisters, so when John brought Julia to the house, Cecilia was immediately worried about Angelica. She thoughtfully called Angelica and told her that John had arrived. Cecilia hurried to meet Angelica herself first, to bring her up to date with the news and prepare her before she met John. Angelica, how long have you been in touch with John? Cecilia asked. A long time ago, you might say. Lately, I hadn't been able to get in touch with him. Either he was busy, or he wasn't in the mood. I decided not to insist on communication. I decided to wait for him to come, and then I could communicate with him in person. Angelica said, not suspecting anything yet. Well, in that case, I can explain his behavior to you. He got a girlfriend. They decided to get married. He brought her to us. She's at our house now, Cecilia said. What did your parents say? Angelica asked. Mom's against it, of course. Dad hasn't spoken up yet. But believe me, his parents won't let him marry that girl. And John himself has only ever favored you. That girl from the village wanted a beautiful life and probably just turned his head, Cecilia said. But John's a grown man anyway. I wouldn't want to have a relationship with him, knowing that he intended to marry someone else. If he decides to choose her, so be it, Angelica said. Are you crazy? Don't be so naive. You realize that John is every girl's dream, and you're one of them. If you give up, there's a good chance you'll meet some strange man with strange intentions. These hunters for women's hearts are usually very skillful, will tell you about high feelings and selfless love. They themselves will only have in mind your money and connections. I can see that in John's girlfriend. She gets up bright and early every day and tries to please every member of our family. It's understandable that she has a lot of interests, and you're just gonna put your hands down and say, whatever John decides, that's what happens. John can decide with this upstart, not with reality, Cecilia said. "What did you suggest? Do you want me to fight for him?" Angelica asked. Fighting or helping John make smart choices can be called many things, but you should consider that our whole family is on your side. Your whole family is on your side. Our parents and yours will only be happy about your marriage, and you both benefit from it. You think, with those initial conditions, it's possible to try, don't you? Cecilia challenged Angelique. Angelica stared thoughtfully out the window and pondered Cecilia's words. Cecilia realized she was going in the right direction and continued her speech. "This plan means you won't have to work too hard. I don't know how long John and his girlfriend will be here, but Mom and I will figure something out. All you have to do is wait for our signals and proceed as instructed. Our goal is to sow discord between John and this girl, and every time he feels bad about the conflict, you will appear as an understanding friend. We'll take it from there," Cecilia said in a businesslike tone. "Well, if you're willing to help me, I'm gonna try to compete for John. To be honest, I still like him. Hoping for his attention, I've rejected a lot of people. There must be some logic to it, right?" Now Angelica was starting to convince herself. Julia had almost set the table in the kitchen and was waiting for her fiance's family, not realizing what events awaited her in her life with John. Jacob talked to John the next day, of course, but he made it clear that he had already decided to be with Julia, and it was useless to dissuade him. As for the rationality of getting closer to Frank's family, John advised that it would be better to marry Cecilia to their wayward son, which, of course, Mallory and Jacob would never agree to. What parents would want to marry off their daughter to an unreliable young man? And is it acceptable to play with the fate of someone else's daughter, who has crystal clear intentions of starting a family and continuing the family lineage? This is a question not usually asked in the families of grooms. A few days later, Cecilia was sitting on the balcony of their huge mansion, looking at something on her phone while chatting with one of her friends. When she was done, she went down to the kitchen on the first floor. Here Julia was diligently preparing something for dinner. "Oh, it smells so good. How lucky John is to have a wife. She's beautiful and caring, and she cooks deliciously," Cecilia said with a wide smile. Julia had no idea about the family arguments surrounding her marriage to John within the Weasley family. None of the family members had given any indication that she wasn't welcome here, and they would soon begin to actively set about eliminating her. But she had taken Mallory's somewhat cold attitude as the norm. "I've heard that mothers are often jealous of their sons of their daughters-in-law. Yet she has had full ownership of her son for 27 years, and now I share that attention with her. Maybe she's not used to sharing her son with me yet, but that's okay. I'll find my way to her heart. She is the woman who gave birth to and raised the man of my dreams. I'll always show her the respect she deserves, no matter how she treats me." Julia thought to herself and set herself up for the best. Cecilia did not show her true attitude in any way. She treated Julia with the utmost courtesy and complimented her. When they were alone together, though, Cecilia was free to be sarcastic and caustic about Julia's background. She was the daughter of ordinary people, not of officials like John and Cecilia. But Julia's mother tried to raise her to be a decent person, so she judges everyone by herself. So when Cecilia allows you to make barbed remarks, Julia ignores them. In this way, she convinces herself that she holds the bar high in her behavior. This is a common misconception of many women, not considering the fact that others may perceive it as a weakness. "I admire how divine your baked goods are." Cecilia gave Julia a fat dose of flattery. "Yeah, I love working with pastry. This pie with curd and lemon. Do you want a slice? It's really hot off the presses." Julia was genuinely pleased at the attention. No thanks. I don't eat sweets. All flour and sweets are poor people's food because they are low quality and cheap. And I advise you not to eat too much of it, or you'll get fat like the village women," Cecilia said, and continued to look at Julia with a smirk. Julia was taken aback by this unexpected barb. While she was considering what to say to Cecilia, or whether she should answer at all, she asked, "John, when's he coming? You didn't call him." "No, she hasn't called. I think she'll be here soon," Julia said after Cecilia, who had already left the kitchen. All of Julia's euphoria over the flavorful pie had turned into an unpleasant residue. Cecilia's got a talent for it. To compliment and thereby emphasize one's belonging to the world of the chosen ones is still a skill. John arrived just in time for dinner. Cecilia met him at the entrance and held her smartphone screen up to his face. "Look, this bracelet from a very famous brand just went on sale 2 weeks ago. My mum showed it to me, she really liked it. Let's give her a present and split the money and buy her this bracelet. What do you say?" Cecilia asked her brother. "What's the occasion?" John asked. "What do you need an excuse to make your mom feel good? Can't you just surprise her? How hard can it be?" Cecilia began to subtly press her brother. "Come on, surprise, surprise. How much is it?" "I'll give you the amount. You buy it yourself." "Okay." "Oh, okay. That'll be $500. Mine's ready," Cecilia said. John pulled out his cell phone, made a couple of clicks on the screen, and told his sister, "I put it on your card. Don't forget to tell Mom it's from both of us. I want to see her happy too," John said one last time. A couple of days later at dinner, Cecilia stood up and ceremoniously handed the branded bracelet to her mother. She was surprised at the unexpected gift, but the children convinced her that it was normal to make pleasant surprises without an occasion. Mallory accepted the children's gift with great joy. At the family dinner, Cecilia announced that Angelica was having a small party tonight and she was invited. Her parents didn't wait for Cecilia's request to let her go, but suggested that she go to Frank's house and join the party. Cecily emphasized that if it was late, she would stay there overnight. She repeated to each member of the family not to expect her for the night and to go to bed. At midnight, when all the family members were already fast asleep, Cecilia quietly opened all the doors of the house with her key and made her way to her mother's room on the chains. She knows very well where her mother keeps her precious jewelry. As one would expect, the newly gifted brand name bracelet was also in that place. Cecilia took the jewelry box and also on the chains made her way to the dressing room where Julia keeps her things. Then she also quietly closed all the doors behind her with her keys and went to continue the festivities. When Cecilia returned to her home in the morning, Mallory had already discovered the missing items and sat in confusion. When she saw Cecilia, she told her that she had lost the bracelet she had given her yesterday. Cecilia was not confused. "Julia, have you seen Mom's bracelet we gave her yesterday?" Julia ran out of the kitchen where she was washing dishes and answered, "No, I haven't." "It's a shame, Mallory. Maybe you put it somewhere and forgot about it," Julia said. "I vividly remember trying it on in front of the mirror in my powder room and putting it back in its box. I even remember I was going to wear it to work today and brag to everyone that the kids gave it to me," Mallory said. "Mom, let's take another good look in your room. How can anything be missing from the house if no one has touched it?" Cecilia said and led her mother to the second floor. There Cecilia pretended to look for the lost bracelet for a while. The voice inside her told Julia that something dangerous was going on around her. She decided to push the unpleasant thoughts away and remembered to go to the supermarket and get some groceries. While her mother-in-law and her daughter were on the second floor, she took her bag from the dressing room and headed for the exit. "Julia, wait!" She was stopped by the imperious voice of Cecily, who was coming down from the second floor. "I looked in my mom's room, and it's really not there. It couldn't have disappeared into nowhere. It could have ended up in another woman's hands. I was out last night. Mom was asleep, which means the other woman is you. Where is the bracelet?" Cecilia asked threateningly. "How could you think that about me? I didn't even touch the bracelet." Julia was even more confused. Cecilia said, then walked over to Julia, quickly grabbed her bag out of her hands, and turned it upside down. The entire contents of the bag scattered to the floor. The bracelet box fell at Mallory's feet. Julie, stealing is wrong. If John finds out, he'll be very upset. You could just ask him to give you one too. Cecilia continued in an admonishing tone. This is some kind of mistake. This is a setup. I never even thought about stealing anything from Mallory. Julia only now realized how difficult it would be for her to prove her innocence to these people, and she was horrified. As Cecilia continued to talk, Julia sprinted out the door and headed for the bench outside. She immediately called and told John everything. He promised to take care of it tonight and asked her to wait for him. At that moment, Cecilia dialed Angelica's number to delight her with the news. Angelica, get ready. John and his girlfriend are going to have some serious problems tonight. You need to call and prove yourself a loyal friend. Make John want to spend the rest of the evening with you. Invite him out. He'll definitely go out tonight, Cecilia said and hung up. Mallory didn't pay much attention to who her daughter was whispering to on the balcony. She was completely immersed in her own emotions and only repeated to herself that she knew this girl would not bring good to the family. In the evening, there was a real showdown. Julia cried, swearing by all the saints that she had touched nothing. Cecilia, on the other hand, was unwavering in her accusations. Mallory sided with her daughter. Only Jacob realized that there seemed to be two separate factions within the family, and one of them had declared war on the other today. John realized it too. So when Angelica called him and asked him to spend the evening together in a languid voice, he briefly rejected all her offers and turned to Julia. We need to talk in private. Mom will be late. You and Cecilia try to calm down and forget all the talk of the day, John said. He took Julia to the nearest cafe, and they discussed what had happened for a long time. John drew the right conclusions and decided to act immediately. Meanwhile, another family had their own dramas going on. Selena came home from work early so she could make dinner for the whole family. She already knows it's useless to ask her sister-in-law Cassie to do this. Even though she stays at home and doesn't work anywhere, Cassie will find 1,000 excuses to dodge any housework. Opening the door with her key, she was surprised to see unfamiliar shoes in the passage. And from the kitchen came cheerful voices. She walked into the kitchen and saw the neighbor's son Harry. As befitted Harry's usual lifestyle, there were cans of beer and some kind of snacks from bags on the table. What's going on here? Casey, did you bring him into the house? Selena asked. Hello, neighbor. I was just stopping by for tea. Peace out, Harry said, leaning back in his chair. Casey wasn't in the kitchen. She'd raised her voice from the living room. Yes, the neighbor from the stairwell came by to say hello. Casey rushed to explain everything to her mother-in-law. Okay, Harry, we're not being very hospitable here. You please go home, and Casey and I have chores to do, Selena said. Everything is as the mistress says it will be. I'm leaving for sure. Ulek, you're great. Come over to my place too. We'll have a beer and play some dungeons, Harry said and walked slowly towards the exit. As soon as the door closed behind Seryoga, Selena took Casey by the elbow and said menacingly, Are you out of your mind? How many times have I seen you messing around with that bum in the yard? And I kept quiet, thinking you knew what you were doing. Why the hell are you bringing strange men into the house when my son isn't here? And why is it a neighbor? Didn't you think it's abnormal to bring an ex-con into the house? A convict? I didn't know that. Casey still didn't understand her mother-in-law's reaction. And he told me he was in the army on contract, she continued. Selena could smell the acrid odor of alcohol from Casey. Woe is me, woe is me. An educated, well-mannered son brought into the house of an obscure girl. She is here all the alcoholics from the neighborhood, and she drinks with them at the same time. Why do I have to go through this ordeal? Selena clutched her heart. So he's your neighbor. He asked to come to your house. How was I supposed to know he was a convict? Your son loves me, and you're just jealous. That's why you don't let us live in peace. I'll tell him everything, said Casey. She's always so brave when she's drunk. And she drank a lot, as Mickey's parents had noticed. By this time, Selena had already dialed her husband's number and was telling him what she thought about Casey for the umpteenth time. Harvey seemed to want to avoid quarrels in the family as always and tried to calm down his wife. She couldn't stand it and almost became hysterical. She carries our grandson in her belly, drinks alcohol every single day, and is always hanging out with our neighbors. Now I have big doubts whether our grandson is in her belly. Talk to my son and tell him to deal with her immediately, otherwise I'll have to kick her out of the door myself. Casey heard those words and got turned on too. Oh, so you did tell me that we got married in wedlock. I knew it was a red flag to any mother-in-law. She mumbled to herself and dialed Mickey's number. But that was just one episode in the life of Mickey's family. Ever since Casey arrived in the house, scandals have become a regular occurrence. He and his father barely have time to calm their women down. Mickey realized that Casey really doesn't show herself as a woman. She can't cook. She's not used to keeping her house clean. She doesn't want to work anywhere because she thinks that everyone is cheating and underpaying her. He found out about all this too late. By that time, Casey was already pregnant and demanded from Mickey to take responsibility for her and for the future child. Mickey, like a decent man, agreed to all of Casey's demands. Selena, on the other hand, couldn't accept it. She hoped to see an educated and well-mannered girl as her son's life partner. Well, at least a girl without bad habits and without the tendency to start conversations with every man in the yard. But where to go now, when soon a grandson or granddaughter will be born? Selena only prayed that a healthy child would be born. Unfortunately, Casey's lifestyle didn't predispose her to that. No matter how much Selena talks about the harmfulness of beer, energy drinks, and quick snacks from bags, Casey immediately complains to Mickey that her mother is jealous and does not give her life. After the incident with the missing bracelet, John talks to his father and makes the right decision. He and Julia are not going to live peacefully in the same house with Cecilia and his mother. John rented an apartment and moved Julia there. The wedding was also decided not to postpone for later. However, both were very worried because the opponents of this wedding turned out to be enough, and it is not known what they can still throw out on this day. The news that John and Julia had planned a wedding for next month puzzled Cecilia and Angelica. Angelica was sure that Cecilia would definitely think of something to keep the wedding from happening. But when they heard the date of the wedding, they decided not to give up. There was still plenty of time. If they couldn't upset the wedding, they could organize something special right on the day of the wedding, so that the marriage wouldn't last long. This idea encouraged Cecilia, and she decided to go ahead. John and Julia decided to hold the wedding modestly and for a small circle of the closest people. They booked a restaurant and distributed invitations to all the guests. On the appointed day, Julia excitedly prepared for the most important event in her life. Her parents arrived in advance, but John's parents didn't want to meet and get to know them beforehand. "I'll see you at the wedding. I don't have time for you now," Mallory replied briefly to the introduction. John and Julia didn't pay much attention to the relationship between their parents that wasn't working out and were looking forward to the best. Angelica and Cecilia had bought fancy dresses for the occasion. But that was not all their preparations. The main surprise required more preparation and more effort. They even had to pay for it. They did not stand for the price. The long-awaited day came. The wedding was in full swing. The guests made toasts, congratulated the newlyweds, and had fun. The parents did not particularly seek each other's company, and each of them sat in the circle of their loved ones. As the evening approached its midpoint, Cecilia stepped out to make sure her plan was ready. After a long musical intermission, the guests went to their tables. An unfamiliar, beautiful girl entered the room and drew the attention of all the guests to herself. Because she was wearing a wedding dress, the guests thought for a moment that they were imagining it. But Julia was still sitting next to John, and it was some other bride. John, on the other hand, turned white when he saw the girl in the wedding dress. The stranger in the wedding dress discreetly took the microphone from the Toastmasters table and began her prepared speech. "John, you're probably wondering why I'm wearing a wedding dress today. I think you remember the date exactly 4 years ago today. Long before that day, you told me that you dreamed of seeing me next to you in a white dress. Then you and I decided to realize our dream and secretly got married." The guests sobered up instantly and began to murmur among themselves. The parents looked at the girl with the microphone and John in total confusion. John stood there like a stumbling block, unable to think or say anything. At that moment, a video about the love story of John and this mysterious girl in a wedding dress started on the huge screen in the restaurant's festive hall. Yes, indeed, in the frames John shines in the image of a happy groom who is languidly waiting to meet his bride with a bouquet in his hands. In the next shots, this strange girl is spinning at the mirror and puts the finishing touches on the image of the bride. The beautiful shots are accompanied by a romantic song. The girl asked for the audience's attention and continued her speech. "And then you walked away, leaving me and my daughter. You betrayed our love, but I decided never to betray it. That's why I still wear my wedding ring." The girl raised her right hand and showed her ring finger with her wedding ring to the audience. She then continued her speech. "You told me that fate may separate us, but you will always live in my heart as my first and only love. I decided to live the rest of my life by those words. That's why I tell our daughter that Daddy will come back to the family someday and we will be happy again, as we were on this day exactly 4 years ago. John, I see now that you have decided to start a new page in your life. However long your marriage to Julia lasts, may it be a happy one. But I know for a fact that you and I will be together again. I believe that our daughter you will definitely not leave without attention and affection," the girl continued to say. The bewildered Toastmaster stood next to the girl and persuaded her to give up the microphone. But the girl deftly dodged him and walked around the hall. He finally caught up with her and almost forcibly turned off the microphone. The girl finally shouted something in the direction of the newlyweds and left the room. But the love story continued on the screen. Julia almost fainted from what she had seen and heard. Accompanied by her friend, she went to the ladies' room, barely restraining her tears and emotions. The festive mood of the guests vanished in an instant. Jacob, who was almost impossible to get out of his mind, shook his head and sat with his hands over his face. Julia's parents started looking for their daughter to comfort her. They were even ready to take her away from here forever if she wanted to. John's friends said something indignant to him, but he heard nothing. In his head, there was only one thought: to take the microphone from the Toastmaster and all the guests to say the names of those who came up with this cynical number. But it was too late. The guests got into several groups and hurriedly left the hall to give time to the heroes of today to sort out among themselves. Who knows, maybe the showdown would result in the wedding being cancelled. John got up from his seat and headed after Julia. He found her in the ladies' room. John was sure she was probably sobbing or hysterical by now, but it seemed he still underestimated her. "John, do you know this girl?" Julia asked. She was a little dejected, but she was in control and seemed to understand where the wind was coming from. "This is the first time I've ever seen her. In fact, I don't understand what kind of show this is. I've never dressed up as a groom before, and this is the first time I've ever done it, believe me. It's some kind of a setup, and I'll take care of it. It's only a matter of 2 minutes," said John. "Yes, I'd like to believe that version too. But how do we save the situation?" Julia asked. "The only people left in the audience are parents and friends. We'll continue with them," I'll take the microphone myself now and comment briefly, and that's it, John said. Everyone's mood was ruined. Only Angelica and Cecilia were sitting in the car in the restaurant parking lot, waiting with great curiosity to see how Julia would behave next. At that moment, someone knocked on the window of their car. Cecilia saw a hired actress from a local club who had played the role of the jilted bride brilliantly. She was waiting for the rest of her fee. The guests were so dumbfounded by what was happening that no one even paid attention to the fact that the strange bride, leaving the restaurant, got into the car of the acting troupe with large inscriptions and logo. She during this time managed to calmly change her clothes, disband her hair and put on glasses, so that no one even accidentally did not recognize her. The actress took the money, gave her accomplices their shares in the car, and the troupe left. I'd never dreamed of such a weird wedding, Julia said, finally reaching the apartment. I'll start looking into who's behind this tomorrow. I think the event organizers and maybe the restaurant staff are involved. They're not going to get away with this, John said. Yes, this is a case where exposure is a must, Julia added. What did your parents say? They're the most embarrassed of all. And mine didn't give them a very warm welcome, John said. Well, my mom is aware that I have become the classic unloved daughter-in-law to my mother-in-law. I warned them that there might be all sorts of surprises, but I don't think they were ready for just such a surprise. Julia even smiled a little. John looked at her smile and felt immense gratitude for her trust and faith in him. It was only Julia's calmness and judgment that had saved the day. Although she had lost her temper at first, she was able to pull herself together quickly and not let the insidious plans of her detractors come to fruition. After the wedding, Angelica and Cecilia waited several days for news from the newlyweds. But there was no news. Angelica realized that it was pointless to keep fighting for John. Only Cecilia was not going to give up. She had a good reason. Cecilia works as a financial director for her mother. Mallory is about to take a well-deserved vacation. Of course, she's grooming her daughter to take her place. But for Mallory's business to continue to thrive from steady government contracts, someone in the family is bound to be in a position of power. Jacob, who has served as first deputy governor for more than 20 years, is about to take a well-deserved vacation. And that could mean the state contracts could go away and Mallory's firm could go out of business. Frakes had his eye on the job for a long time, and he's made no secret of it. And Jacob sees him as a worthy heir to his chair. In order for the scheme to continue to feed all those who have long been accustomed to the trough, there must be a very close cohesion between these people. Cecilia understood this very well. Therefore, she spared no money, time and energy to get rid of Julia and set up her brother John with the only daughter of Frank's family. But Julia turned out to be a tough nut to crack. During the next week after the wedding, John had no trouble figuring out how the strange girl got into the restaurant and how she got the dubious love story video broadcast. The restaurant staff, under pressure from John's friends in law enforcement, quickly admitted that some people came and made their own changes to the wedding program. They did not elaborate on what the specific changes were. That was their mistake. And none of them knew the actress. John found that actress through social media. When she was brought to the police station, she refused to talk. While the police officers were trying to get some information, they got a call from above asking them to release the actress immediately. John was pleased with the fact that it was possible to prove to everyone that it was an order number. And the identities of the people who invented and ordered all this noise were no longer so important. Well, I'll find out. They'll tell me it's my own sister Cecilia and her friend Angelica. Maybe even my mother knows. Who's going to feel better? I'd already know they're always plotting against Julia and our marriage. In time they will get tired of it and stop these cheap tricks. John explained his version to his friends. The friends did not insist on continuing the investigation. They were more worried about Julia and her reaction. When John told them that she was very calm and reasonable, The friends were very surprised and noted that John had really met a worthy woman. John himself knew this, and now he was quietly proud of it. Since the birth of her grandson Frederick, Selena has been forced to live on two homes. Between family and business, she makes sure to find time to drop in on Casey and Mickey. Casey continues to resent this, believing that mother-in-law interferes in her life. In fact, Casey has, as one might assume, become a worthless mother. She has absolutely no maternal feelings for her child. She is still drawn to the streets, where she can drink with someone or just disappear for long periods of time. That's when the child is left alone. Selena hopes to get her grandson into a kindergarten soon, and then she will feel better for him. But for now, the kindergarten refuses to accept him, as little Frederick is severely delayed in development. Today, Selena decided to visit her son's family again. She opened the door with her key. In the hallway, she saw the shoes of little Frederick and realized that the child was home alone again. The first thing she did was look in the children's room. Frederick is not here, and it is not by chance. He doesn't like to sit here. Usually, little Frederick likes to mess around either in the bathroom or in the kitchen. Selena hurried into the kitchen. The kitchen door was closed for some reason. Selena opened it, and at the same moment, her heart leaked into her heels. In front of the open windows of the kitchen balcony stands Frederick's plastic toy table, and on the table is his stool. Frederick himself stands on this stool and almost jumps out of the window, trying to scare away the pigeons that are crowding the window. Seeing her grandson in such a precarious position, Celine cried out his name. Frederick turned around and saw his grandmother running toward him. The child thought it was just a normal game. Many children think if someone is running towards them, they will catch up soon, hence the need to run. As Selena covered the distance between the kitchen door and the window in a few steps, Frederick managed to sneak onto the windowsill. He wasn't looking into the abyss where he wanted to take a step. He was looking at his dazed grandmother, and he was indescribably amused by it. Frederick was saved from the last fatal step by the deft movement of the grandmother when she was able to grasp Frederick with both hands. Selena lifted her grandson off the windowsill and carried him into the living room. Little Frederick still didn't understand what could have happened and continued to laugh, considering himself in the game. She dialed Casey's number. The latter didn't answer right away. As soon as Casey picked up, Selena almost shouted at her, "Where the hell are you? What kind of mother are you?" A child almost fell out of the window. "Selena, who asked you to come to us anytime you want? I can manage my child just fine without your help. I just went to the store for a few minutes," Casey said. Casey seems to be completely incapable of understanding the meaning of words and the consequences of various rash actions. Selena realized that a long time ago, and she's been trying to get it out to Mickey. But what's the use? By the way, does Mickey even know what's going on in the house while he's away? She dialed Mickey's number and told him what tragedy had been avoided a few minutes ago. "Mickey, this isn't a joke anymore. Your Casey's not likely to ever grow up and realize her responsibilities in life. But we're risking Frederick's safety and his life for her. Please don't ruin your life with her. Try to get rid of her. I can raise my grandson myself. It's better for him. And at least you'll have a chance to meet a decent woman," Selena said. She didn't notice that by then Casey was already in the apartment and had overheard the whole conversation. As soon as Selena hung up the phone, Casey burst into the living room and tried to snatch Frederick out of her grandmother's arms. As she did so, she was loudly resentful. "You still haven't gotten over your jealousy. You're even willing to divorce Mickey and me over it. You've been giving us a hard time since the beginning. We separated from you to save our family, but you keep interfering with it even from a distance," Casey said. "Otherwise, you'd still want to drink with the first man you meet, loiter and parasitize my son. You're hiding behind my son to continue your promiscuous lifestyle. You can't even realize that by doing so, you are sacrificing your child. Selena once again tries to get through to Casey, but in vain. There were many such conversations and incidents in this family's life, but they were useless to Casey. This time, after Selena threatened to take Frederick back to her place, Casey was afraid that she might push Mickey toward divorce. Without thinking long, she made a decision that would help keep Mickey in her life. A couple of months later, she was able to successfully implement her plan. The pregnancy test showed 2 stripes. Casey was confident that Mickey would not abandon a pregnant woman and then a woman with 2 children, and Selena would hardly dare to take on the responsibility of 2 small children at once at her advanced age. Casey was delighted with her resourceful decision and looked forward to the birth of her second baby girl. However, nothing had changed in her lifestyle. Parallel to these events, there were also changes in John's life with Julia. After the unpleasant surprise at the wedding, they didn't communicate with John's loved ones for a long time. During this time, they learned from the news that Jacob Wesley had left his post and Frank had taken his place. Surely, the question of removing Julia from John's life had become even more pressing for this family. But John and Julia decided to arrange their lives as they saw fit. John successfully built his career, succeeding at every step he took. Julia also worked until the birth of their daughter, Eva. Eva is now 3 years old. She makes her parents happy every minute and gives them endless happiness. Julia was thinking about going back to work these days. John was against it. "Julia, I don't want our Eva to have the stress of adjusting to daycare. She's such a homebody. In a couple of years, she'll want to be around other kids. Then you can think about work. Right now, I'm still willing to work day and night so that you and your daughter don't need anything," John said. "But I'm already bored sitting at home." Julia stretched lazily. Carrying a child under your heart, giving birth to it, and raising it is a huge labor. It's just something society has come to take for granted. I don't want to be so consumeristic with you. You need to rest and recuperate, and then you can think about work, if you think it would be good for you," John said. Such words sounded very convincing to Julia. She continued to enjoy motherhood and lovingly cared for Eva. It was a pity, though, that Eva had not yet been seen by her grandparents. They would have loved her for sure, and maybe they could forget old conflicts and finally recognize Julia's right to be near John. One cozy family evening, John called to say he wasn't expected for dinner tonight. This has happened to him often since he became an executive. Julia is very understanding. If she can't make it in time for dinner, she'll come back later. She and her daughter have a great time and are not affected by John's busy schedule. After a while, John said that soon there will be a corporate party in the company and everyone should come with their other halves. Julia happily agreed, as she had not known any of John's colleagues until then. John's team turned out to be really united and cheerful. The guests were having fun, singing and dancing. At some point, Julia decided to go to the ladies' room. She had not noticed until then that some of the guests had been watching her closely since the beginning of the evening, waiting for a more private moment with her. Following Julia out of the room was this mysterious man. As Julia stood in front of the restroom mirror fixing her hair, the mystery man dared to approach her, and it was a woman of great beauty, statuesque and haughty. "Hi, what's your name?" the lady asked. "I'm Julia. My spouse works in this company as a CFO," Julia said proudly. "I know him," the lady smiled enigmatically. The lady didn't say anything else and just watched Julia's every move with a smile. If at first she had thought that one of John's colleagues had decided to meet her just for the sake of politeness, now she was a little confused. The lady seemed to be following her purposefully. "How long have you and John been together?" the lady asked. 5 years in total, 4 of which we've been married. We have a wonderful daughter." Julia tried not to give away her doubts and keep her composure. "A little early," said the lady and smiled even wider. "What's a little early?" Julia asked. "It's a little early for him to start cheating on you, honey. Maybe it's for the best, and it'll be easier for you to find your man." She began to fix her hair thoughtfully. "What are you trying to say?" "It's okay. John loves me, I love him too. You gave birth to a daughter, I can give him a son. Just keep that in mind. The sooner you realize that I'll win, the easier it will be for you," the lady said, looking straight into Julia's eyes. Julia had an immediate sense of déjà vu. Throughout her life with John, how many times had she heard such threats? She couldn't count them all. As a rule, it was usually someone close to John who was behind them. Julia was glad that this time she hadn't given in to her emotions and had figured out what was going on almost immediately. On the way home, John asked about Julia's impressions of his co-workers. She shared all the positive aspects of the evening, but a strange lady came up to me and tried to tell on you. But I'm an old-timer, and I know that intrigue against our family can be found anywhere, so I didn't argue with the lady. And by the way, I didn't even ask her name, Julia said, looking at her husband. John didn't comment on this, but drove on in silence. It was as if a whirlwind of emotion had started inside him, and he was trying to hide it carefully. Julia thought that John, too, had long since had enough of these cheap tricks, and that was why he was reacting in such a way. At this point, this incident was forgotten. After the birth of the second child, Casey was much less worried about her marriage to Mickey. Her position in the family is now stronger. Mickey loves his son and daughter very much. For their sake, he is ready to do anything. If Selena does not constantly interfere, as it seems to Casey, then Mickey is simply an ideal husband. But for Casey, it was completely unexpected when Mickey once poured a flood of emotions on her. Casey, a mother of two, can't be so careless. How many times can you leave your kids alone and go out with questionable friends? Who are these friends of yours? They're basically backyard drunks and bums. Do you really think you're on the same level as them? Everything has to be in moderation. I can't take endless days off work to take care of the kids. You need to rethink your lifestyle and get smart, said Mickey. Casey was even more confused. So she'd thought Mickey was on her side, but somehow Selena had swayed him to her side. It looked like her mother-in-law was getting serious about her now. That's what she thought, and took all the objective criticism she got. After a while, she really decided to change and become a responsible mother. In her mind, it looked like a working and earning woman. She decided to make a surprise for Mickey. She got a job as a sauna administrator, and Mickey informed her about it only on the eve of the first working day. But Mickey surprised her again with his reaction. "Casey, you don't need to work and make money. I'm doing just fine. You just take good care of the children and don't think about money and work while they are little. When they grow up and become more independent, then please work for your own pleasure," Mickey said. Casey was very upset. She felt like she was being picked on for nothing. Everything she did was wrong, and everything was wrong. She remembered some advice from a fashion magazine that a woman should never give up on her goals, no matter what a man told her. So she decided not to give in to Mickey and go to work. Working in a sauna meant socializing with different people. However, those who wanted to socialize in the sauna often turned out to be drunk people. And these conversations are very specific. "Young lady, you're so beautiful, but you're so sad. Did someone hurt you?" On Casey's first day at work, there was a kind person at work who was ready to listen to her and feel sorry for her. Casey, out of the goodness of her heart, told her whole family story. The random visitor of the sauna must have regretted in his heart that he had started this conversation, but out of politeness, he listened to her to the end. As a man who lives solely in accord with his spontaneous impulses, the casual visitor made the decision to try to become a cordial friend to Casey. His name was Tony. Casey was getting more and more involved with Tony. He waited for her after work and took her to bars. Casey loved it when a man could just listen to your complaints and support you. And if he bought her a drink or a cocktail, in Casey's mind that equaled universal love. So Tony became a new meaning of life for her. Now, Casey could talk to him day and night. If Mickey or Selena were in a bad mood again, she could write or call Tony at any time. He would find time to take her to a bar, listen to her, and then spend a pleasant evening in solitude. Mickey was most worried about the children on a long business trip. The day before, he had sat Casey across from him and urged her to be more attentive and responsible for just a couple of weeks until he returned from his business trip. Casey took it all in stride again, but as soon as Mickey left, Casey asked her neighbor to watch the kids and went on the trip Tony had been asking her to take for a long time. Casey returned from her trip just before Mickey arrived, but the trouble was, their son Frederick seemed a little sick. Both of his eyes were swollen shut and almost completely closed. Casey rebuked her neighbor for not keeping a good eye on him. When Mickey returned from his business trip and saw his son in such a state, he was furious. He decided to take Frederick to the doctor that same evening. The doctor examined the child and shook his head. It is an infectious disease that affects the eyeballs very quickly. It's especially dangerous for children. I'll certainly try to treat it now, but you're running out of time. Your son is at risk of losing his sight completely, the doctor said. Indeed, Frederick's eyes began to itch and ache right after Casey left for her trip. By the time she returned, the damage to his eyes was extensive and the boy had almost stopped seeing. Mickey expressed all his anger and resentment toward Casey. She, on the other hand, saw no fault in it. She still believes that Mickey just doesn't let her live the life she wants, especially since Tony assures her that he does. That night, Casey couldn't take it any longer and expressed everything she had in her heart. You restrict me from everything. You didn't like it when I stayed home. I got a job and found myself. Now I finally feel like a free person, but you don't want to respect that. I'm a human being too, and I have the right to live my life the way I want, said Casey. Casey, for God's sake, I too dream of you living a full life. But now that you're a mother of 2 children, isn't it time to consider them in your life? Do you feel like you can leave the house at any time to go out with your friends and party until morning? And mind you, this doesn't happen on holidays or on a schedule. It's your normal way of life. You reproach me with limitation. But do you have any standards of life yourself? Mickey asked. You're always torturing me with your conditions and demands, but it's different with Tony. He understands and supports me. I can have fun with him and talk to him. Not like you and your family, who have to do everything according to a set of rules, Casey blurted out. Mickey had a vague idea, of course, that working in an entertainment establishment was very much to Casey's liking. But he hadn't expected her to find another entertainer so quickly and to believe that it was the highest of feelings for life. By then, he'd had enough of that kind of life. As a result of that evening's arguments, they decided to part ways. Mickey felt it was right for the children to be raised by a hired nanny or their grandmother. Casey packed her things and left for Tony's. Mickey didn't bother to stop her. He was more concerned about Frederick's health. According to the doctor, only a major operation could restore his sight. And before the operation, someone should take care of the children. Selena, of course, had taken over completely. Mickey has decided to redouble his efforts at work to save up the money for the operation as soon as possible. He had to hurry up because Frederick would soon be starting preschool, and then it wouldn't be long before school. Changes were on the way for the second family. Julia only now noticed how much John had changed lately. He'd grown cold to her. Where before he would only stay at work for a few hours, now he might stay all night or even several nights. Julia was afraid to suspect him of cheating. She realized that if she judged based only on her assumptions, it would mislead her even more. And in order not to make mistakes in relationships, she needed to be very patient and judicious. Her past experience is a testament to that. How many times she could give in to the impulse of her emotions and lose her relationship with John for no good reason. So she decided not to make any decisions until she sees with her own eyes John's infidelity or another reason for his cooling off. Eva is already big enough, goes to kindergarten and dreams of going to school sooner. Julia intends to go to work soon and distract herself from bad thoughts about John. Could it be that sitting on such a long maternity leave, she too has become monotonous and uninteresting for John? On one such evening, John arrived unexpectedly early. He was drunk, something Julia had not observed him doing before. Little Eva missed her father and was now trying to draw attention to herself in every possible way. Julia noticed this and said, "Since you're home, why don't you and Eva take a walk while I clean the house and make dinner? Don't you have time to walk the baby all day?" John said in surprise, "We go out with her every day. Can't you see she misses you? Both parents are important to a child." "I don't understand your reaction," Julia said in a calm tone. "Both parents? Here I am, for example, an adult child, almost 5 years out of touch with my parents. What am I supposed to do?" John came very close and looked at Julia angrily. Julia was dumbfounded by John's unexpected behavior. She seemed to realize where her husband wanted to take the conversation. While she was trying to answer, John continued his claims. "Julia, do you think it's okay that I don't talk to my parents or even try? As a mom, you're supposed to be better at this than I am. Or do you still think my parents are our enemies?" Julia realized that she had been hesitant to talk to John about it for such a long time. She'd realized for a long time that she and John would sooner or later have to resolve the issue with her parents and most likely make the first step toward reconciliation. Only she knew John's adamant nature and had been hesitant to suggest it to him. And now she realizes that she was too late with this conversation. That night, Julia clearly realized that John felt resentment and anger towards Julia for not communicating with his parents. Like a reasonable woman, instead of returning resentment and recriminations, she began to think of ways to repair John's relationship with his parents. Eventually, she was able to formulate a clear plan. Mallory's birthday was coming up. Under this pretext, they will visit the parents with gifts, show them a granddaughter, and Julia will try to get Mallory back to her. But these plans were not to be. A couple days later, John came home drunk again. He had gotten caught up in some little thing and turned it into a big family scandal. This time, Julia learned something else new. John threatened to kick her out of the house, and Eva would stay with him. But Julia didn't understand why she deserved such an attitude. Her beloved husband didn't bother to explain. From that moment on, constant recriminations and scandals became a common occurrence in Julia's family life. It was little Eva who suffered the most. She began to sleep badly at night and practically refused to eat. After a while, her hair began to fall out. Then Julia became angry too. She decided to put an end to these endless conflicts, no matter what it cost her. She only had to look closely at his behavior to understand the reason for it. He had obviously been hiding something from her for a long time, but he had no desire to hide it any longer. In such cases, modern people are always helped by cell phones. Julia had never allowed herself to violate her husband's personal boundaries before, but today she realized that she had to deal with everything urgently and make important decisions. She reached for John's cell phone with these thoughts in mind. She wasn't too surprised when she found correspondence with someone named Sarah. There she saw various photos of Sarah and recognized her at once. It was the same lady who approached Julia at the corporate party and assured her that she and John were in great love. Then Julia took it for another intrigue of her enemies. Turns out she was very wrong. Judging by the correspondence, Sarah and John have gone very far. They have been living as a family for a long time and making common plans for the future. According to Sarah's messages, She has now pushed John into a narrow framework and set conditions for him to choose one of two women. Of course, Sarah makes it clear by the word choice that it's eliminating Julia and starting a new life with her. At that moment, John came out of the bathroom and saw Julia with his phone in her hands. Julia didn't pretend that nothing had happened. She was even relieved that the situation was finally clearer. John, too, seemed to have been waiting for this moment for a long time. Julia silently began to pack her daughter's things and put them in her suitcase. John saw the whole process and did not react. Couldn't you just say it without these protracted scandals that have been going on for almost 6 months? Julia was talking to herself. Julia has a long journey ahead of her as her parents live in another area. But Julia did not want to go to them. She had already thought out her future life. She and Eva would get to the capital. She would put her in a kindergarten, find a job, solve the housing problem, and then she would go to her parents and tell them about everything. And maybe John will still come to his senses and make a step forward during this time. In this case, Julia is ready to think everything over and once again try to save the family. But now she sees no point in it, as John is completely infatuated with Sarah, and in his picture of the world, Julia is still an extra person. As Julia packed 2 suitcases and headed for the exit, John stopped her. "Take only your things. Eva will stay with me," he said in a determined tone. "You'll have a new life now. Eva is still young and she has suffered enough from our fights with you. She needs care and peace, so I will take her with me anyway," Julia said. "Where will you take her? You have no job, no place to live. I won't let my child suffer a miserable existence. Please don't forget that Eve is the daughter of the Weasley family. She's entitled to a certain standard of living," John said, shocking Julia once again. The long argument turned into a loud scandal. As a result, John pushed Julia so that she fell to the floor. While she got up and came to her senses, he took her apartment keys, locked the door from the outside, and left. Julia had intended to pick up Eva from the daycare center and go straight to the train station. Now she wouldn't get to the daycare center either. She tried to call John and talk to him, but he dropped her calls. Julia hoped to the last minute that John would pick Eva up from the daycare center and bring her home in the evening. But in the evening, neither John nor Eva was there. She continued to call John persistently until she realized that he had finally blacklisted her. John showed up well past midnight. He was drunk again and incredibly angry with Julia. "Where's Eva? Did you pick her up from daycare?" Julia asked. "Don't worry about Eve. She's part of the Weasley family. It's about time she met her folks. I picked her up from preschool and took her to her parents' house. She's immensely loved and spoiled there. You can go wherever you want now." John opened the front door of the apartment and pointed his finger toward the exit. "John, come on. Eve's just a little girl. You can't keep me away from her. You tell me what I've done to deserve this punishment. I'm ready to let you go. I've always been ready to reconcile with your parents and try endlessly to win their favor. You're wrong if you think I've separated you from them. John, let's calmly discuss everything and make a decision together," Julia pleaded, but it was useless. John didn't listen to her words. He first pushed her suitcase out the door, then took her by the arm and pushed her out onto the landing. Julia realized that she had failed in her fight for her love. If she had been able to defeat all the intrigues thanks to John's love and support, what about now that he had betrayed her? Julia wandered around the city all night with her suitcase. In the morning, she decided to go to John's parents and try to talk to them. Her goal was to get her daughter back at any cost. Early in the morning, she pulled up in a cab to John's parents' house. She pressed the doorbell, and it didn't take long for the answer to come. Someone came to the door, opened it, and looked at Julia questioningly. "Hello, I'm here to see Mallory and Jacob," Julia said. She wondered if the strange woman who answered the door was the Weasleys' new maid or one of the other household helpers. I'm sorry, you mean the Weasleys? They sold the house 6 months ago and moved out. We're the owners now, and we don't know the Weasleys' new address, the strange woman said. Julia apologized for the disturbance, walked away from the gate, sat down under the fence, and tried to figure out how she could find the Weasley family. After a while, she got up and went around to all the neighbors, hoping to find out some information about the Weasleys' new place of residence. But the Weasleys were not in the habit of talking to their neighbors. Consequently, none of the neighbors even knew that the Weasleys had moved here at all. That was the first day of Julia's vagabonding. She didn't have much money on her. If she spent it on a night in a hotel now, there would be no money left for the journey. So she decided to spend the night at the nearest train station. Early the next day, she arrived at John's office and waited for him in the parking lot. It wasn't hard to catch John. Julia saw his car and came running. It was the same Sarah who got out of the car first, then John. Julia's attempts to talk to John were fruitless. He pushed Julia away from him and quickened his stride, heading for the entrance to his office. Sarah watched sullenly, then snorted in his wake, and together they hid behind the glass door of the business center. After 3 days of such tossing around, Julia realized that it was useless to fight for her daughter. She herself was exhausted during this time. She was not used to living on the streets. Julia decided to get to the city, there to try to organize her life, to gain new strength, and with the help of a lawyer to get justice. Tired, battered, and shabby, Julia had a hard time getting to the bus station and boarding the train. A few years earlier, Mickey's family had suffered a great sorrow. His eldest son had lost his eyesight because of his mother, Casey's negligence. Thankfully, at the time, Grandma Selena was alive and well. She took the children to her and took care of them. Mickey then set a goal to do the operation at any cost and restore his son's sight before he went to school. But when he saved up the necessary amount of money, it turned out that Frederick had a whole bunch of other diseases that did not allow him to undergo the operation. Doctors advised to cure other diseases first, and then only to perform eye surgery. So Frederick will be late for school for at least 2 years. In the meantime, he has to attend a school for the blind. Selena prayed and dreamed that her grandson Frederick would finally regain his sight and become a full-fledged child. But by then, she herself was already on the brink. Her life was cut short by an unexpected stroke. Frederick and Ariana, who was so accustomed to their grandmother, suffered the most. They missed her terribly. Then Mickey took them to his house and found a good nanny. The nanny helped them with organizing their lives until Frederick's surgery. Fortunately, the surgery was a success. The very next day, Frederick opened his eyes very cautiously and saw his daddy Mickey and his little sister Ariana in front of him. There was no limit to his happiness. He had lived a blind life for more than 5 years. Now he had to reacquaint himself with his surroundings, and it was a process he was enjoying immensely. Frederick couldn't seem to get enough of the world. Mickey, too, was endlessly happy about it. He took a vacation to spend as much time as possible with his children. The single father and his 2 children walked in the parks from morning to night, exploring nature, drawing and learning about the world of colors. Mickey was very inspired by his deep experience of being a father. Amidst the inspiration, the idea came to him to take a family trip across the country. After a couple of days, he gathered his children and traveled by train to the Tumen region to explore the unseen mysteries of the domestic expanse. There they spent an exciting 14 days and seemed a little even tired of the experience. They were looking forward to finally getting on the train and starting to explore the new pictures outside the window again. Mickey and the 2 children were not far from Julia, who was already fast asleep from fatigue. The train had already moved off. Frederick and Ariana did not sit quietly for long. After a few minutes, Frederick's curiosity about the world awoke again. He stared wide-eyed at the scenery outside the windows and continued to ask his father questions. "Daddy, what color are the mountains?" "The mountains are dark blue or gray. It all depends on the specific area." "You say the mountains are dark blue, and your pants are dark blue too. But then why don't they look alike?" Frederick asked. "Because it's clothes, and there's mountains, nature." Ariana tried to appear omniscient and answered her brother's questions. "Daddy, what color is Auntie's suitcase?" Frederick asked again. "It's burgundy, son." "And burgundy is also pomegranate and tomato," Ariana added. "No, daughter. Pomegranate is scarlet. Tomatoes are red or pink." Mickey patiently explained to his children. "I get it. Pink is like paint on this aunt's lips," Frederick said. He came close to Julia and almost poked his finger into her lips. If Julia had heard the annoying talk before, she opened her eyes abruptly and raised her head. Her body was shattered with fatigue. Her head ached, and she really wanted to sleep in this position for at least an hour. But this boy had turned his full attention to Julia and was asking his father about every detail of her clothes. Julia herself didn't notice how she had flared up at one point. "Man, maybe you can calm your child down. He asks too many questions. At this age, he should know a lot and certainly control his behavior in society," she said. Mickey clearly didn't like that remark. "Lady, don't be rude. You don't know anything about my son, and I won't let anyone make any remarks about him," said Mickey. "It's worse for you. Your son will grow up to be a rude bore." Julia didn't recognize herself in her emotions. "My son has recently started to see the world. Before that, he was blind. He is only in his second month of exploring his surroundings with his eyesight. I am doing my best to keep him looking at the world with an exploratory eye," Mickey said and switched to talking to his son. "And you probably don't have children of your own, so you don't know anything about this business," the older woman said toward Julia. "Don't worry, Grandma. I'm the best mother in the world, and I'll prove it. In the meantime, the fate of my child will be decided by an evil woman like you," Julia replied. "So rude," snorted the older woman and turned away to the window. "Where's the mother of your children? Isn't it hard for you to be a single father?" Another middle-aged woman approached Mickey. Mickey decided to ignore the curious questions of the others and continued talking to his children. But Julia was no longer able to control her emotions. She decided to answer instead of Mickey. "Most likely his family survived the mother of those children, and now they are building the most caring relatives," Julia said, closed her eyes, and pretended to be asleep. Mickey was confused. On the one hand, the lady had hit the mark. On the other hand, she wasn't quite right. So he decided to answer her. "Society likes to blame men for not being involved enough in raising children. But even among mothers, there are unworthy ones who can leave their children in the middle of nowhere and quietly go on a long journey." Now Mickey's words stick like an arrow into Julia's heart. For the past few days, Julia has been frantically trying to ward off the idea that she would be an unworthy mother if she left her daughter with her relatives and went away on her own, and then a complete stranger steps on her heartstrings. Young people, everything happens when you are young. Most importantly, if you sincerely love your family and do not betray yourselves in this love, then any hardships in life will be solved. It seems to me that you both have faced great adversity in your married life, and each of you blames the other. We don't know the whole situation, that may be the case, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is that you manage once again to find your strength and move on. Whether it is a direction to meet your family or from your family, let your hearts decide," said the elderly man with glasses. The rest of the way, they each thought about their own thoughts. Julia tried to imagine John in Mickey's place. Would he be able to care for his family as much as he did and protect it from outside attacks? Until recently, she believed that was the case, but it turned out not to be so at all. Mickey has realized from Julia's words that she has been forcibly deprived of her child and is depressed about it. He now tries to imagine Casey, who has never suffered much in her life for the sake of her children. At another station, the train stopped and passengers began to get off. Julia deliberately waited to be the last to get off. Wandering around in the unfamiliar area looking for a coffee machine, she found herself once again not far from Mickey and his children. They were picking out ice cream. "Hey Dad, you can't let kids eat ice cream in this weather. The kid's just out of surgery, so he needs to be careful of inflammation," Julia said and went on her way. Mickey did just that. He persuaded the children to give up ice cream and buy something else that wasn't cold. The children also clearly heard the words of the strange aunt and did not object. The train finally arrived at the final station. By this time, Julia had had enough sleep, and she felt energized. "Auntie, you have beautiful hair," said little Ariana to Julia, touching her hair with her little hands. Julia felt awful that her daughter had stayed somewhere else, while she was already in another city thousands of kilometers away. Ariana reminded her of Eve, who also admired her mother's hair and loved to mess with it for hours, trying to make it look nice. Julia looked at the girl silently, hugged her, and held her to her chest. At that moment, tears streamed from her eyes. She had barely contained her emotions for so many days, and now it seemed she no longer had the strength to control them. Mickey and Frederick looked at Julia and Ariana in surprise. "Don't cry, or your mascara will run out and smear all your makeup," Ariana said, and wiped Julia's tears away with her little hands. On the one hand, Julia was amused that this little princess was as knowledgeable about women's issues as her Eva was. On the other hand, when now she could see her daughter and hold her to her chest, would the Weasley family allow her to do that? "You'll forgive me for my emotions, I couldn't help myself." Julia said goodbye and looked at Mickey. "We all do. Which way are you going now?" Mickey asked. "I don't know yet. This is my first time in DC in the last 5 years. My parents live in a different area. I used to have friends, so I'll try to find them for the first time," Julia said. "Come with us. We have plenty of room in the apartment. You can rest and then start looking for your friends," Mickey suggested. "Auntie, come with us. I'll show you my makeup." "If you want, I'll do your hair," said little Ariana. Julia realized that she could not let go of this little girl. So she didn't resist the invitation to spend the night. It turned out that Mickey lived in a spacious and well-maintained apartment. Despite the absence of female hands, the apartment was perfectly clean and cozy. That night, Mickey ordered pizza. They had dinner together. The kids kept sharing their impressions and boring Julia with their questions. When it was time for bed, Mickey made Julia's bed in the living room. He himself went to tuck the kids into their rooms. The next morning, Julia intended to leave before the family woke up, but she didn't succeed. As soon as she tiptoed out of the bathroom, Ariana came running to her. "I promised you a beautiful hairdo. Let's do it now, shall we?" she suggested. Julia felt she could not refuse to let her little hands play with her hair for anything in the world. Her longing for her daughter was tearing at every fiber of her being. As much as Julia forced herself to leave early from the house of strangers, her soul did not want to part with Ariana. She promised herself that she would only make breakfast for the children and then leave to find her friends. When breakfast was ready, Ariana asked to stay and have breakfast together. At this time, the babysitter came to see them. Mickey sent the children for a walk with a nanny and started talking to Julia. "I can see you're having a hard time. What happened? What events have caused you to be so depressed?" Mickey asked. Julia told the whole story of her family life. Mickey realized that the girl was in a rather difficult situation and offered to help her with work. But Julia thanked him for his participation and refused to help. She kept hoping to find her friend Elizabeth, who had graduated from law school and was building a career in her specialty the last time they saw each other. Julia hoped to get some counseling from her friend and then think about setting up her life. Mickey walked her to the door and told her that if she didn't find her friend by tonight, she could go back to his apartment. Julia wandered around the city all day, trying to remember the address of Elizabeth's office, but the day ended without success. In the evening, it was necessary to return to Mickey's family again. The children, especially Ariana, was immensely happy to have Julia back. After a few days of empty attempts to find anyone she knew, Julia realized that she had been wrong to refuse Mickey's help in finding a job. She reminded him about it, and in 2 days, Julia's job search was solved successfully. She was hired by a company where Mickey's friend is the manager. Julia started working and continued to live in Mickey's apartment. She first offered some money for living expenses. Mickey ignored the question and said nothing. Her longing for her daughter was somewhat assuaged by Ariana. Frederick turned out to be a very sociable guy, so Julia quickly made friends with him. Julia got her first paycheck, and by that time she had looked for an apartment to rent. But before she moved in, she went to a lawyer for advice. He promised to help, but he had to drive her to the Tumen region at his own expense and pay a lot of additional expenses. All this requires additional time. The children accepted Julia's move with sadness. Julia promised to invite them to a housewarming party in the near future. The housewarming took place exactly 1 week later. Frederick and Ariana were sad that Julia didn't want to stay with them. They were even sadder that Daddy would soon go to work and would have little time for them. On one of the most ordinary days, Mickey called Julia and asked in an excited voice if Frederick and Ariana had come to see her. Julia was surprised because the children had definitely not come to see her. Mickey revealed that the children had left a note saying that they had gone to visit Julia. Julia wanted to take a cab and rush over to Mickey's house. But what would happen if the children came to her house while she was away? And the time was getting closer to evening. Mickey went to look for the children in the nearest neighborhood, while Julia waited for them at her house. A lot of time had passed, and there was no word from the kids. Mickey had to go to the police. The police were just looking for Mickey's contacts at the time. It turned out that Frederick and Ariana really decided to go to visit Julia, but on the way they got lost. They were found by the police and taken to the police station. When Mickey and Julia arrived at the police station, the time was well past midnight. After what had happened, Mickey decided to have a serious talk with Julia. Whereas before he had offered Julia a life together as help, now he was asking her for the sake of his children. He even promised to pay Julia just to keep his children happy. But Julia took offense at the offer to pay her money for company. She agreed to move back into Mickey's apartment. By that time, she realized that she had become attached to Ariana and missed her as much as she missed her daughter. Now Julia lives with Mickey and takes care of the children. The neighbors are already whispering that Mickey finally got married, and the new bride seems to be not bad. But Julia wasn't interested in a new relationship. She is still thinking day and night about how to take Eva back to her place. Meanwhile, Mickey was surprised to discover every day something new of a woman's real warmth and care for her family. It seemed to come so naturally to Julia. She easily found a common language with Mickey's children. She knew how to persuade them and pick up the right words. She enjoyed cooking delicious meals and was masterful at getting them ready to go out. In addition, Mickey had long ago noticed that Julia was quite good-looking. It was true that lately she had neglected her appearance a little. But Mickey had a clear idea of how stunning she would look if she gave herself some money and time. He decided to give her that treat. The following weekend, he gave Julia a certain amount of money and urged her to spend it on herself. Julia did so. In the evening, she returned home a refreshed young girl with a twinkle in her eye. Mickey realized that he could now gradually make steps toward winning Julia's favor, but he was very worried that his initiative to enter into a relationship might offend her. She had recently gone through a difficult breakup and was pining madly for her daughter. One night, when the children had gone to bed, Julia was talking about her daughter and showed Mickey a long ago family photo. Mickey looked at the photo and was literally stunned. "So this is your ex-husband?" Mickey asked. "Do you know him?" Julia asked. A pleasant smile appeared on Mickey's face. "That's John. He studied finance and worked in a trading company while he was still a student. And he was also boxing at the time, going to a gym in the old Arbat neighborhood. Am I right?" Mickey asked. "That's right. That's when he and I first met and dated," Julia said. "Now give me his phone number," Mickey said. Julia dictated his phone number. Mickey wrote it down and said, "I can't promise you anything, but I'll try my best to talk to him." Julia didn't pay much attention to Mickey's words. What could he do from a distance? This matter can only be settled through the courts, she thought. Julia was preparing breakfast for the children when the doorbell rang. She looked through the peephole and saw a strange woman at the door. Julia opened the door. "Hello, who do you want?" Julia asked. "And good luck to you. And who are you?" The woman, who smelled a pungent odor of booze, looked indignantly at me. At this point, Mickey heard extraneous conversations and went to the door. The unfamiliar woman saw Mickey and immediately turned to attacking him. "Mickey, how could you let a strange woman into your house? Where are our children? The children need their own mother, not some strange woman. I want to see my children." A drunken Casey demanded to see her long-forgotten children in high tones. Despite Mickey's attempts to calm her down and send her back, she managed to make her way into the hallway of the apartment. Barely on her feet, Casey called her children by name, but Frederick and Ariana only looked out of their rooms and back shut themselves in there. Mickey managed to get Casey out with great difficulty. During this time, Julia managed to find out that the man for whom Casey left her children and her family had abandoned her long ago. Casey now has nowhere to live and no job. It was an amazing coincidence that it was during such a period that she remembered her children. However, there was still more to come. Casey now began to visit Mickey and Julia almost every day. The children absolutely refused to see the woman. They didn't even seem to remember her. But Casey continued to demand that Julie get out of here and vacate her apartment immediately. Attempts to peacefully negotiate and resolve the matter were unsuccessful. At one point, Julia felt genuinely sorry for Casey as a woman, but it was useless to talk to her about it. Then Julia decided to try a somewhat unconventional approach to solving the problem. From the family album, she took out some good photos of Casey and posted them on a dating site. There were quite a few offers. Julia carefully selected each of them to find a more or less suitable match for Casey. Julia honestly told all the men that she was looking for an easygoing man for her friend. From the candidate, she demanded serious intentions, a job and a great desire to meet a girl with whom you can live your life without much worry. And there were quite a few of them. Julia gave Casey's phone number to a few selected candidates and strictly warned that the bride did not know about the dating site and the efforts of her mysterious friend. For potential candidates, it did not prove to be a problem. After 3 days, Mickey's apartment was quiet. There was no more banging on the door or drunken debauches on the landing. Julia realized that it was likely that one of the potential candidates had found a way to approach Casey. But Mickey didn't know the whole story and was worried sick trying to think of a solution to Casey's attacks. Julia left him alone with these worries so as not to seem too resourceful. On one of the usual days towards evening, Mickey called Julia and asked her to come home early. He promised that there would be a surprise waiting for her at home. Julia thought that surely Mickey must have bought something or wanted to give her money for shopping and salons again. What was her surprise when, after coming home from work, she opened the door to Mickey's apartment and saw her Eve in the living room. She couldn't believe her eyes. It turned out that Eva had missed her mom a lot too. They were sitting in each other's arms right on the floor and couldn't get enough of each other. Only then did Julia become curious as to how Mickey had managed to get her daughter. Mickey only smiled enigmatically and promised to tell her everything at the family dinner. I was walking home from practice one day and noticed that in the darkness behind the garages, two big guys were beating up one guy. The victim was almost unconscious. He had no strength left to resist or beg for mercy. The bullies were beating him brutally. I decided to stand up for this guy. I managed to quickly calm the two men down so that they ran away in the darkness, blazing their heels. The guy had already lost a lot of blood and was lying half dead, so I took him to the hospital, and a couple days later he came to. By that time, even his parents had arrived. I visited him a couple times, just for humanity's sake. Then his parents thanked me immensely and offered to ask me anything I wanted from them. Like an honorable man, I didn't ask for anything and just disappeared from these people's lives. But I do remember John's face. After I was discharged from the hospital, he found me and bought me a couple of beers. That was the end of our acquaintance. So the other day, I called his parents and reminded them of the thanks they wanted to give me years ago. I told them the truth and asked them to give Eva away. So today, John brought Eve himself. I promised the Weasleys that I myself would personally take care of their granddaughter as my daughter. Eve will be a sister to Ariana. All that's left is to get you to agree, Mickey told Julie. Julia thought for a moment that everything was happening as if in a dream. When Ariana and Eva hugged her from both sides, she realized that this was not a dream, but the real life she deserved. If I understand correctly, did you just propose to me? Julia turned to Mickey. Mickey only smiled back. Well, then I need to consult with the people who are important to me, Julia said. Then she turned to the children and asked, Frederick, Ariana, and Eva, are you ready to be brothers and sisters to each other and call Mickey and me Mom and Dad? Asked Julia. Yes, the children answered with glee. If the most important people say yes, how could I say no? Then I'll say yes too, Julia said. A couple of weeks later, Mickey and Julia were officially married. There were no more marital problems along the way. Maybe it was because they had paid a high price for happiness in advance. A janitor suddenly arrived with a bucket and helped the teacher from there. A bad groom paves the way for a good one, my grandmother used to say. What does that mean? Frowned 13-year-old Sarah. And that means that if some poor groom appears on the horizon, in a little while you will wait for your real soulmate, explained Grandma Batty with a smile. It's a folk omen. Did you have it like that too? My granddaughter asked curiously. She smiled slyly, and her eyes suddenly became surprisingly young. I remember in the post-war years, there were not many suitors, so Evan decided to hit on me. He was small, ugly, crooked-legged, with a hare's lip and snot running out of his nose all the time. The girl grimaced. Yep, nodded Grandma with a smile. But my parents said, Betty, don't throw it away. Even though he's a bad one, he's his own. Such a one won't go for a walk. One evening I came to the dance in a new dress, a beautiful red dress with large polka dots and a white lace headscarf, and Evan was walking behind me. Sarah imagined the stately beauty from the old photos walking proudly down the street, with the little snotty mess behind her, and laughed out loud. My grandmother continued her story, and there were nostalgic notes in her voice. Oh, she was good. Betty shook her head, as if thinking of something of her own. That day, the boys from the neighboring village came to visit, and Evan started bragging about my fiancé. The guys praise and envy Evan, and one of them looks at me seriously. And when I looked at him more closely, I realized that's him. And then they announced the white dance. So I was a fool, and I asked them to do it. So what? The granddaughter asked with a smile. What do you mean, what? Thank God. 62 years together and 7 children. Betty laughed. So it was Grandpa, gasped Sarah. Who else would it be? The old woman chuckled cheerfully. It just so happened that Evan had led me to the real fiancé. Who knows, if he'd kept quiet, no one would have noticed me. He made it worse for himself. You know, Grams, I kind of feel sorry for him. And for nothing. Soon Evan found another bride and got married, but he's not very handsome. First, the whole village went to our wedding, then to Evan's. That's the story. The grandparents were in their 80s, but neither Betty nor Barry was over 60, or even less. Sarah's father was the youngest son of the couple. Alexander had come into the world when his parents were in their 40s. Both, laughing, said that the secret of their youth was love. What is true is true. The two elderly people were very reverent towards each other, and the girl sometimes thought that if one of them left this world, the other would not stay in it for long. For as long as Sarah remembered her grandparents, they had almost never parted. Recently, Betty had been in the hospital, and Grandpa had been there day and night. He brought his wife not only pureed soups and fruit, but also bouquets of flowers. Doctors loved this loving, cheerful couple and well envied them. Here it is, swan fidelity, thought the attending physician, when he entered the ward and saw a touching picture. Vasily Yakovlevich held his wife's hand and gently stroked it. Sarah, who was also there, felt incredibly proud. The girl often dreamed that she would make a husband as caring as her grandfather. Only with a small correction. Sarah did not want any bad, but his sorters. She, a tonight girl, really wanted to make a love that would be the one and only. After all, that's what happens too, thought Sarah. However, ironically, the omen worked in the case of her granddaughter. In the Pedagogical Institute, where Sarah and her school friend Angelica entered after school, with grooms were not abundant. 1, 2, and a few. And those were just a few. In a word, nothing. Yes, the Pedagogical Institute was definitely not the place to make a cool guy, Angelica said. But who says we can't make him somewhere else? After the first scholarship, the friends decided to go to a bar, where they met some medical students. They chatted about everything in the world and stayed up late. After those parties, Angelica started dating Harry, Sarah with Stephen. But alas, without much love. After a month, it became clear that nothing would come of the relationship. You're wonderful, Sarah said. But I guess fate has prepared you and me for the other half. I'm sorry. Well, I guess you're right, sighed Konstantin. He realized that the relationship wasn't working out, and there was no point in torturing himself and each other. Hitting acquaintance for company is not the best option at all. If a spark ran between two people, it did not mean that the same thing happened to the others. Good luck to you, Sarah said. You're bound to meet someone who will love you with all her heart. You're really cool, aren't you? I can tell you the same thing, Stephen smiled, and they hugged warmly. That's it. No more dating for dating's sake, the girl decided, watching Stephen until he was out of sight. Sarah remembered her grandmother, who had already passed away a year ago, taking her grandfather with her. The girl was right. Without her adored wife, Barry's life had lost all meaning. After Betty's 40th birthday, her grandfather passed away quietly in his sleep. Betty's soul had left this world, so he was sad. Their neighbor Katie whispered and crossed herself. The kingdom of heaven. So, if you believe the omen, Stephen is the bad fiancé who will lead me to the real one, thought Sarah. Is Stephen a bad guy? No, he's a good guy. He's just not right for us. But Grandma never said he had to be bad. Oh, how she missed her grandmother. Sarah would come to Grandma Betty's house, and they would take their time and discuss matters of the heart over a cup of fragrant tea on raspberry twigs. The grandparents had left Sarah their apartment. The girl entered the inheritance, but the apartment has not yet moved in because of the delayed repair. Yes, and dreary there without old people. Relations with her mother were trusting, but unfortunately, Nancy was not up to heart-to-heart talks. Sarah's parents, successful doctors, were always traveling, and now, when she came home sad and wanted to talk, Alexander and Nancy had left for another conference. What are you, like a nun? Rolled his eyes Angelica. Well, you did not work out with Stephen, but life is not over. No, it's not over, Sarah confirmed with a smile. But does that mean I have to throw myself into the arms of the first man I meet? Well, why the first guy you meet? Exclaimed her friend. There are plenty of good-looking guys, but you don't notice them. Maybe that's why I don't notice that there's no one I'd be willing to live with for the rest of my life, Sarah said thoughtfully. You only super-duper macho of your dreams do not say that, Angelica giggled, or he'll immediately give a shout. The girl only shrugged her shoulders. Why would I tell him that? If it's fate, he won't run away. I'd look at you, Sarah, and I do not understand whether you still have youthful maximalism has not yet outlived itself, or you have invented an ideal image of yourself. I just don't want to change. Yeah, I ignore guys I'm not interested in. But who does that hurt? Them. Not in my experience, no. Myself. But you have to admit, I'm the only one who knows what's better or worse for me. And sleeping together and breaking up is not for me. Neither is a relationship based on the principle of just to be had. That's the way I was born, and I'm not going to be any different. Yeah, I guess so, Angelica agreed. You're right, I'm sorry. It's nothing, smiled her friend. The 5 years of her college years flew by in a whirlwind, and Sarah's personal life didn't change. She went to parties, honestly tried to look at possible candidates for boyfriends, but alas, tonight girl never met him. Further than innocent flirting relationships with guys did not progress. Well, that's all right, Nancy reassured her daughter. If you're unlucky in love, you'll be lucky in your career. Oh yeah, my mum was good at that. She was a career woman. Still, Mom's happy. Don't worry, Nancy smiled, taking her daughter's hand in hers. You'll see, we'll have a lot more fun at your wedding. I'm not worried, Sarah replied and smiled too. No, really. Marriage is not an end in itself. I just want to be loved. You will. The ringing of Nancy's cell phone broke the idyll. This is how it always is, the girl thought with disappointment. However, Sarah had no time to dream about a big and bright love. She was more concerned with the question of employment, but fortunately, it was solved rather quickly. A good friend of Nancy's worked as a head teacher at a school that needed an elementary school teacher. The woman put in a good word for Sarah, and on the 1st of September, dressed in a new satin dress the color of iris, went to work. A graduate of the Pedagogical Institute and the first class entrusted to her were new, and it was incredibly exciting. Having listened to horror stories about disrespectful teachers and wild antics of students, Sarah was afraid. There was a class period coming up, and the young professional's knees were trembling. She was wearing high stiletto shoes, and the girl was seriously afraid of falling on the way to class. Or right in front of the students. What a laugh, thought Sarah, as if her fall was a done deal. But the fear was in vain. Everything went well. Sarah, you're very pretty, said a pretty, russet-haired girl with a puffy bow on top of her head. Thank you, she smiled. A compliment from one of the mentees cheered her up. Sarah, feeling more confident, said, Guys, parents, stay together. Everybody follow me. My name is Sarah, she said affably, and suddenly, to her embarrassment, she realized she didn't know what to say next. But when Sarah saw the smiles of the parents of the first graders, mostly moms, the shame and fear went away. And she continued in a more confident voice, Perhaps you have some questions. Don't hesitate to ask. The class hour was held in a friendly atmosphere. You are a very nice woman, one of the moms said with a smile, and the newly appointed teacher smiled warmly at the young woman. I'll try not to betray your trust, Sarah replied. A meeting with a ceremonial bent was held after the class hour. Dear colleagues, congratulations to everyone on Knowledge Day, said the school principal Selena, a pretty brunette of about 45 years old, with kind, shrewd eyes. Besides, I would like to introduce you to a new employee. Meet Sarah. Please love and welcome. The director gestured lightly at her, and then each staff member said his or her first name and middle name. Sarah felt embarrassed for some reason, and immediately became angry with herself. How much embarrassment can I take? I'm a grown woman, a teacher, after all. She stood up gracefully and looked around the staff with a smile and said, "Nice to meet you. I hope we get along well." Sarah took a quick glance around the group and noted the friendly looks, except for two. The first was the evaluating and, oh God, oily stare of a young man a little older than her, of sturdy athletic build. Probably a gym teacher, Sarah guessed. Quite handsome, by the way. The second look was openly hostile. When she met eyes with a platinum, brightly painted blonde from the same age group, Sarah immediately realized that she had to keep her eyes open. Otherwise, there would be trouble. Her co-workers cheered Sarah up, laughing, joking, and she sat there as if frozen. And all those two. Sarah, not being stupid, instantly realized that the blonde was jealous. Maybe there was something between them, or maybe there was, or the blonde coworker is counting on it. Who cares? She thought deeply. I came here to work, not to have affairs. So, let the girl sleep in peace. And then the gym teacher furtively winked at Sarah, quite meaningfully, I must say. She defiantly turned away, and it didn't escape the blonde, who immediately frowned. What a Santa Barbara! She grinned to herself. And I seemed to be at the epicenter of this outrage. After the meeting, the principal invited everyone to the dining room, where a fancy table and a corporate party at midnight awaited the teachers. Thankfully, the next day was Sunday. Sarah got to know all her colleagues and had a drink with some of them. I'm always happy to see new young employees, said a tipsy Selena with a smile. No, really. Unfortunately, young specialists willing to work in an ordinary secondary school are very rare today. And you, young, beautiful, and the Institute spoke well of you. That's good. A spect who hasn't even started working yet opens her mouth. Well, nothing. She thought vindictively. We'll see who's who. In war as in war. The teacher's work began. Sarah loved her students, and they reciprocated. The realization that she was sowing reason, goodness, and eternity filled Sarah's soul with pride. She enjoyed the process of learning and loved to go for walks with the class. During one of these outings, Sarah came up with the idea of having a tea party. It was a great way to get to know not only the students, but also their parents. Guys, she called to the class with a smile, "Come to me, everyone." The kids flocked to their favorite teacher in a flash, and Sarah suddenly compared herself to a hen's hen. What an association, she teased herself. "Guys, I have an idea," Sarah announced solemnly. "What's the idea, Sarah?" The first graders are chattering away. "Why don't we discuss this in class?" "No," they protested in unison. "Well, all right, the teacher gave up. "I'll tell you my idea, and then we'll go to class. Okay?" "Yes," the children exclaimed joyfully. They reached the public garden near the school and sat down on the benches next to a long table. In summer, this place was a favorite with school children, students, and local alcoholics. "Okay, guys," Sarah started. "I'd like to suggest that you have a tea party. We'll bring tea from home, and whoever we can cookies, sweets, scones, and have a feast for the whole world. How about that?" "Great," Anna exclaimed. "My mom is going to bake a cake." "Such a big cake. Chocolate." "Well, if your mom has time, of course," Sarah said. "She's probably working." "Mommy bakes cakes to order," said the girl proudly. "They are so beautiful. You've never seen them like this." "That would be interesting to see," smiled the class teacher. "And my grandmother makes delicious rolls," Vanya Sinitsin said importantly. "Better than in the store, really true." "Well, that's great," Sarah said approvingly. "I'd love to try your grandmother's rolls. And my mom makes scones. And my grandmother. And my mom's." There wasn't much time left before the end of the environmental lesson, which was the purpose of the walk. so Sarah didn't have a chance to listen to everyone. The teacher raised her right hand up and said, "Guys, I would love to appreciate the culinary talents of your mothers and grandmothers, but we have to get back to school. I'd also need to coordinate with your parents." The first graders went to school without complaint. All the children, except for one student, were in high spirits. Cindy walked behind the rest of the class and frowned. "Cindy, why are you so sad?" Sarah asked. "And I have no one to bake scones or cake," the little girl replied, and her lips trembled. "What's the matter?" the class teacher asked affectionately. "I don't have a mommy, and my grandmother is always busy," the girl sighed. "Daddy says that mommy lives in the sky now, but I know she's gone. I don't remember her." Sarah's heart ached. She was good. As a good teacher, she should have seen this coming and stopped her students from bragging. In fact, she had a not very pleasant, but it seemed correct question to herself. Didn't I hurry up with the tea party? After all, the parents of the students could be busy at work. It's one thing for a retired grandmother who can bake rolls all day long, and quite another for a tired, exhausted mother. She certainly doesn't have time for baking. Not to mention this poor girl. "My poor baby," Sarah said pityingly. "Life goes on as an adult," Cindy replied. "Yes, of course." After lessons, teachers gathered in the teachers' lounge. The teachers reported to the management about incidents and other costs of a hard-working day of a Russian teacher. "Dear colleagues," having gathered her courage, Sarah spoke up. "I think I've done something very stupid today." "Well," Selena said, tapping her fingers on the table, "and what's so stupid? Maybe it's not so bad." "I don't know," the girl admitted and told me about her idea. "That's a great idea," Victoria said sarcastically. She herself, like Sarah, was an elementary school teacher and was not particularly proactive. But it would be a good idea to discuss it with the administration, not with the first graders, who were now waiting for the tea party. "I thought I said I was having doubts," Sarah replied, glaring at her coworker. "And now I'm asking for advice from the team." "Actually, the tea party itself isn't a bad idea," the gym teacher said, and was immediately rewarded with a scathing glare from Victoria. "Why? It's a great way to bond with the guys." "And gain cheap credibility," Victoria venomously interjected. "So cheap authority," Maria, the historian, snorted. "In Soviet times, tea parties were the norm, and no one thought of cheap authority." "That's right," nodded the principal. "But we should not forget that times change and dictate their own rules." Victoria had mentioned cheap authority, and in a way she was right. After all, it's possible that there will be parents who will think the same thing. And from a financial point of view, have you seen the prices of groceries? So parents may not feel the same way about this idea as they did before. Sarah blushed deeply and lowered her head, but Victoria's gaze flashed with triumph. "But not for long." No, Sarah, I don't suspect you of any such thing," the principal hastened to reassure me. "I know you acted in good faith." "So what now? Do we cancel the tea party?" Sarah asked in a low voice. "Well, why not?" Selena replied with a kind smile. "The children are waiting. It's great that you have ideas, but in the future I would ask you to discuss them with me. And of course, it would be a good idea to consult with your parents. And then you can present them to the students." "Yes, of course," smiled the girl. "Thank you, Selena." "You're welcome," she smiled back. "What else is a manual for? You are a new person, and you still have a lot to learn. Any other questions, dear colleagues?" No one had any questions, and the teachers began to go home. Victoria was furious. Sarah put on her favorite cream-colored raincoat, slipped into her high, low-heeled boots, and walked out of the teacher's lounge with one last glance in the mirror. Victoria was standing in the hallway, clearly waiting for someone. "Did you get off easy, you little pigeon?" she asked snidely, blocking Sarah's path. "Let me pass," she threw, glaring at Victoria as if she were nothing. She wanted to say something, but John appeared in the hallway. Victoria, forgetting about her rival, went on the offensive. Sarah grinned and went outside. The young teacher walked down the alley, inhaling the spicy scents of autumn and admiring the bright colors of the season. Sarah, she heard it. Turning around, the girl saw the gym teacher. John was running toward her, not walking, but running. God, what does he want from me? Sarah thought wistfully. This wouldn't happen to be yours, would it? John asked and pulled a chiffon scarf out of his pocket. Mine, she said, embarrassed. How did I do that? The wind blew it away, my colleague smiled. I saw it with my own eyes and shouted at you for 10 minutes. And you didn't respond. Yeah, I guess so, nodded Sarah. I was just thinking. Yeah, thank you. How about a kiss? The girl gave John a look that made him shiver, and he hurriedly raised his hands in surrender. A joke, he said. However, I am quite serious about walking you home. Aren't you afraid? Grinned Sarah. What? Or who? Do we have a jealous husband? No, she shook her head. No jealous husband, but I'd seen enough jealous friends in 3 weeks. You mean Victoria? Well, who else? Or is there another friend at school? That's up to you, John replied with a hint of innuendo. Sarah, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I like you very much, and I don't need to hide it. As for Victoria, I didn't swear my love to her, and I didn't promise her anything. If she's making up stuff for herself, that's not my problem. Anyway, I'm very hungry, and there's a small but cozy cafe nearby. It's almost a restaurant. Well, then go to your cafe restaurant, snickered Sarah, and I should get home. Is your husband waiting for you? John asked, and then answered himself in the affirmative. Of course he is. People like you, everything is just as it should be. First the studies, then marriage to a long-time boyfriend, and not because of love, but because it's the way it should be. Well, and then delicious, nutritious, and of course, healthy breakfast in the morning, borscht, cutlets, picnics on weekends. Sarah was suddenly amused by this conversation, and she added with a chuckle, You forgot the swaddling clothes. No, I haven't forgotten. The gym teacher shook his head with a smile. I just don't think it's come to that yet. You're obviously not the kind of person who jumps out of a marriage as a student and goes on sabbatical due to an impending addition to the family. Everything's under control, everything's on track. You seemed hungry, remarked Sarah. So enjoy your meal and have a good weekend. Sarah rode in the shuttle bus and digested John's inferences. He really believes what he said, she thought. Some people think they're great psychologists, but I wonder where he gets his conclusions from. When the next day Sarah told Angelica, who had been lucky enough to get a teaching job at a prestigious high school, she shrugged her shoulders. And you know, there's nothing surprising about it, the friend gave her verdict. Why is that? Sarah wondered. Because you look like this super right beautiful smarty pants who has her life planned out to the minute. I have nothing planned, she sighed. School home, school home. So your gym teacher flattered you a lot, Angelica grinned, but otherwise he was right. By the way, do you like him even a little? Angelica. Okay, I see. What am I talking about? Let's keep talking. You have that I'm so predictable, and my life is just like that look on your face. Is that a bad thing? No. But you know, you could use a little pepper. Sarah, but you're supposed to be young and have a lot to remember. What are you gonna remember? Work. Sarah couldn't find anything to say, and Angelica took advantage of her confusion and said, All right, we're going to the biker club tonight. No objections. Where to where? Sarah was stunned. To the biker club, Angelica eagerly repeated, It's really cool there. But it's not like I'm a biker. So did I. So, there are such awesome parties and photo shoots there. And there's a photo shoot there today, winked a friend. Sarah stared at her friend in amazement, opening and closing her mouth, reminding her of a beached fish. And what are we looking at? Angelica grinned and looked at her watch. We still have time to go to Stiliaga for a leather outfit. Where am I gonna get the money for a leather outfit? Okay, eco leather is even more spectacular. Like, tight tights. Well, what do you want? You can't go in a teacher's outfit. Maybe we shouldn't. Sarah made a timid attempt to dissociate herself from this madness. We must. Angelica said resolutely. Shall we go to Stiliaga? Let's go, Sarah nodded dejectedly and thought, what the hell? When you think about it, I really don't have anything to remember. And I'm already 23. Sweet, exclaimed Angelica, looking at her friend, dressed in a stylish kosuma and a short, slightly flared skirt made of eco-leather, decorated with deceptive locks imitating pockets. The biker look was completed with boots and tights with a mesh pattern. Wasn't that a little bold? Sarah asked apprehensively. What's with the habit of shitting all over the raspberries? It's great, and don't argue. Mother, Nancy exclaimed in amazement when she saw her daughter dressed like a biker's girlfriend. Where do you think you're going? And we, Aunt Nancy, are going to a biker club, replied Angelica cheerfully. The woman's eyebrows slowly but surely cracked upward. Her homebody daughter was going to a biker club. It's unbelievable. Mom, don't you like it? Sarah asked, secretly hoping her parent didn't approve of her new look. You don't like it? Mother marveled. I've always wanted you to wear something like that. Sarah, it's cool. Really? She asked incredulously and looked at her mother carefully, thinking she had been drinking, but it was nothing of the sort. Why not? Angelica said admonishingly. You must obey your mother. Sarah only shook her head, deciding that what was happening was akin to mass insanity. Did her mom like the way she was dressed? Holy shit, it was Kafka all over again. The friends took a cab to a garage on the outskirts of town, and Angelica told the driver, Okay, now turn right and all the way to the end. They pulled up in front of what looked like an auto repair shop or a basement. More like the second, Sarah summarized. When the girls paid the cab driver, Angelica led her friend down the stairs and finally pressed the call button. Who is knocking at my door? A male voice with a Caucasian accent was heard. They are their own, Angelica said with a laugh, and the door swung open, making Sarah hurriedly jump aside. The girls entered the room, and a handsome, tall, blonde man, who had nothing to do with Caucasian nationality, came out to meet them. Nor did he have anything to do with Caucasians. Hi, Cindy. The blonde smiled. Hi, Chippy. Angelica greeted him, after which they hugged each other heartily. At least introduce her to her girlfriend, the guy said jokingly. My friend's name is Sarah, no pseudonym yet due to my forgetfulness. A pseudonym of some sort, she thought perplexedly. Kindergarten. Chippy, the blonde man introduced himself, bowing slightly to Sarah. Pleasure, the girl said hesitantly, and Angelica drew her away, dropping her. Chippy, we'll talk again. The friends walked on. The club had a bar, billiards, and even a nice sauna with a swimming pool. How do you like it here? Angelica asked. I don't know yet, Sarah admitted, but it's atmospheric. What's behind the curtain? And this is kind of like a photo booth. Then we'll take a picture of you in front of some cooler iron horse. Angelica introduced Sarah to the new inhabitants of the club, who appeared like mushrooms after the rain. Sarah was introduced to the club's new inhabitants, who appeared from somewhere like mushrooms after the rain. How do you memorize them all? Sarah muttered. Don't worry about it, snorted her friend. Of course, you won't be able to remember anyone the first time, but you don't have to. Everything will be remembered later. There were not only young guys and girls here, but also older men, as Angelica whispered respectfully, old school bikers, that were all smiling, and Sarah realized that it was really nice to be here. The doorbell rang. Sarah couldn't believe her eyes when she saw the newcomer, a group of 5 tough guys. Angelica, pinch me. She muttered, shocked. What is it? But Sarah was speechless, and with good reason. Because one of the big guys was none other than John, Sarah's co-worker. In person? Yeah. When she finally found the ability to speak intelligibly and told her friend about it, she laughed. What is it? Sarah repeated her friend's question. Because my star, he was hitting on me too. Why am I not surprised? Well, why are you? It's okay. She waved her hand. I've never been attracted to the prospect of being one of many, and I told him as much. Besides, I have a tender love affair with Chippy. So you're with him? Yeah, well, what's the big deal? But you're an educator, Sarah replied with a slight hesitation. I'm begging you. Sarah, have you fallen off the moon? I'm a teacher. Yes, I'm a teacher. But not a nun, right? And in general, I am a teacher at my lyceum, and here I am a young, cool girl. Like you, by the way. I don't know. Seeing John walking toward them, Sarah tensed. Calm down, old lady, Angelica said encouragingly. This is the fun part. Sarah didn't feel that way. In fact, she suddenly wanted to get the hell out of here, as soon as possible. She'd had enough excitement, not all at once. Aye, John said, looking at Sarah appraisingly. Aye, Angelica smiled. Are you with a friend tonight? Introduce me. She shrugged, and Sarah realized that John hadn't recognized her. That was what made her feel like the boss of the situation. That felt pretty damn good. Do we really know each other? He turned to Sarah, smiling through all 32 teeth. Well, of course, she smiled. John, what's the matter with you? I'm Sarah, your colleague, the one you wanted to invite to the cafe just yesterday. Sarah? The PE teacher asked in amazement, gazing into her face. Well, yeah. Just, makeup. Well, and stuff. John was funny to look at. I just don't know why he was so confused. Was it because he didn't recognize Sarah? Or was it the fact that she had come here at all? Or maybe John wasn't used to seeing a coworker in such informal attire. Probably all together, Sarah suggested. But she seemed to be wrong. Sarah, you're amazing, John purred, pulling himself together. But you know, guys, there's a girl coming over here right now. No, don't get me wrong. It's nothing serious. She's the one who thinks we're a couple. It's okay. It happens, Sarah replied condescendingly. It's a mundane matter, Angelica added mockingly. Yeah, John nodded, and then his cell phone rang. Apologizing to his girlfriends, the hapless boss stepped aside and started the conversation. Judging by his smile, it was a pleasant one. What was that? Angelica laughed as the girls moved a respectful distance away. Apparently, our shooter wants to keep up with everything, Sarah shrugged with a smile. Looks like it. My mood suddenly lifted, and there was no trace of the desire to leave this place as soon as possible. Len, did you say something about a pavilion for a photo shoot? She smiled, but is it realistic to take a picture now? You bet. The girlfriends were filmed against a backdrop of motorcycles, a brick wall, a curtain, alone, in the arms of the most beautiful and brutal bikers. Sarah enjoyed herself immensely. And then there was the sauna, the pool, and soulful lounging at the bar. John, who, as it turned out, was known as Jenny, was nowhere to be found. The girls didn't want his company at all. It was after midnight when we got home. Did you like it? Angelica asked, no longer doubting the answer. Very much so. Oh, and you didn't want to go. Asterisk. Well, I like this girl, confessed John to his best friend Tony, but so foolishly screwed up. John loved the biker club. It was almost the only place in the world where he could be himself to the fullest. That is, not as a teacher, but as a tough guy who could not resist any girl. In the club, it was possible to seduce an unburdened pretty girl and have a great time. But this time, as they say, something went wrong. But who would have thought that the woman John had been dreaming about for 3 weeks would be there? And he had a date with someone else. In fact, John could have sent the lady away and taken care of Sarah away from the staff. But the club doesn't honor that kind of behavior. As a result, the amorous gym teacher had a good time, and now he could not rest. What will Sarah think of me? And anyway, how to win her over? What's the big deal? Tony shrugged perplexedly. Well, you were hitting on her friend. There was nothing going on between you two. So you went out with someone else and… Well, what's she gonna think of me? She won't think anything special. It's exactly what it is. John's a real piece of work. Why? A walker means he's in demand. I'm afraid it's not something that can entice our Sarah. With an ironic smile shook his head that still Walker, to me her friend that in our party Cindy, gave out that she is not interested in being one of many. She's a liberated girl though, and with Sarah, there's no chance. Tony whistled. I don't recognize you, buddy. You haven't actually made any serious attempts to win this, Sarah of yours, and you're already ready to give up. Where's your ingenuity? And is that even you? I do, John sighed, but I guess I've been easy prey so far, and considering my friend, too easy. Teachers, the friend waved his hands. But. John jokingly wagged his finger. Aren't you saying that all teachers are prudes? By the way, your humble servant, if you remember, is also a teacher. Well, think of Victoria. Didn't take much convincing there. You compared too. She's in love with you like a cat. You don't count either. We men are all womanizers. Some more than others, some less, whether you're a teacher or a tractor driver. Well, and women teachers are not that prudes, but, in short, here you need a special approach. I know that without you, John said with a sigh, but the question is, how do I find him? You'd have to know her weaknesses at the very least. Good thinking, Tony nodded approvingly. Well, it's gonna take time to learn all this stuff, isn't it? Are you in a hurry? Said his friend with a chuckle. What a way to put it. You know what happens. I like a girl, and I think she's special. She dynamites you, and that only makes it worse. Well, if she's special, you're willing to wait as long as you want, and now you've finally waited. You splurge, you give her a big romance, but you feel nothing but disappointment. You know why? Because it turns out she's not special at all. No, it's much simpler than that, Tony muttered slowly. There's just no chemistry. Not your girl, that's all. Who the hell is special? We're all ordinary Homo sapiens, just each of us with our own weaknesses. And weaknesses can be played on. But if you're so desperate, I can tell you a universal way. Now, don't be long. John was intrigued. Women have always loved a hero, so be one. Oh yeah, how am I supposed to become one? Well, how? Tony furrowed his brow, like saving your girlfriend in an extreme situation. In what other extreme situation? Snorted John skeptically. I might as well wait for Sarah to mature, and there's still no telling what will happen ahead. So create that situation and be done with it. I don't mean pull her out of a burning house or rescue her when she's drowning. But saving her from bullies is very realistic. John said thoughtfully. There's something about that, and I think I even know how to do it. Sarah had never liked Mondays. She was one of the people for whom that day of the week was really hard. When Sarah was at school and then at the institute, she would come home, tired and exhausted, and immediately go to bed. The lethargy receded by evening, but the feeling that she was unloading railcars did not leave Sarah until Tuesday morning. This Monday promised to be doubly hard, but strangely enough, the girl felt invigorated and rested. It turned out that she could be different too. It gave Sarah more energy than any energy drinker. The young teacher had to ask in the parent chat room what moms and dads thought about organizing a tea party. Since Friday night, Sarah had repeatedly picked up her smartphone and tried to write, but each time she deleted the message and hated herself. She understood, of course, when the task was over, it was easier, but she couldn't help it. It was easy on its own, But when Sarah thought of the director's words, she felt uneasy. And on Monday, on her way to school, a simple but true thought occurred to her. Why am I agonizing? It's up to me to offer, and then it's up to me. They won't hit me in the forehead. Sarah, when is the tea party? Vanya Sinitsin asked, as soon as she entered the classroom. This question is being solved, the girl smiled, and when the first graders were busy writing, she took a gadget and typed the pressing question lightning fast. For 30 minutes, no one answered. Sarah put her phone on silent mode and forgot about the chat so she wouldn't be nervous. When the call rang, she started to look through the messages and was pleasantly surprised. Her parents loved her idea. Cool idea, wrote Samantha. The message was followed by several different emoticons. Why didn't you offer right away? Selena, Anna's mother, was puzzled, judging by the smiley face. I bake cakes to order, but for such an occasion, I'm ready to treat everyone for free. I, though a man, will gladly contribute as much as I can to a good cause, assured Mickey. Sarah remembered Cindy's sad eyes as the children talked excitedly about their mothers' and grandmother's culinary talents. Then she told her that her mom was gone. Sarah clicked on Mickey's profile and saw a young man with kind eyes and a slightly sad smile. It's easier to get over the loss of mom with a father like that, she thought, though of course no one can replace mom. Waking up from her thoughts, Sarah wrote, "Very good. Let's discuss this matter in more detail. Maybe we should get together at a time that is convenient for you." In the end, they agreed to meet on Wednesday. The negotiations went well, and on Thursday morning, Sarah solemnly announced to the first graders that on Saturday at 12 o'clock, everyone was invited to a tea party. Yay, the children shouted. After listening to the words of gratitude after the tea party, Sarah decided that it was not worth stopping. She was sure to come up with something new and no less interesting for her students. The young teacher had no idea what passions were playing out around her. Selena was making a work plan for October. I think I should take a little break, she thought, her mind racing. The kettle boiled, and the principal went to the cupboard. It seemed that there were some quite edible croissants left over from yesterday. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," replied the director with a note of doom. Victoria, an elementary school teacher, stood on the doorstep. "Selena, do you have a moment?" she asked in a begrudging way. The principal sighed. Frankly, she didn't like this person. Slippery, vulgar. But a good manager shouldn't show his personal attitude to his subordinate. "Yes, of course," Celine spoke calmly, "listening to you. I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about that new elementary school teacher?" "Sarah," the principal clarified. "Yes" to her. Selena frowned. Oh, this visit was not a good thing. But since the question had already been asked, it had to be answered, and so she answered it. "Well, how I feel about her is irrelevant, but since it's so important to you, I think Sarah's a good girl, and she'll make a great teacher in time. Is that it?" "Well, I don't know how to tell you this." "As it is, say so." The director shrugged and added, no longer trying to hide her irritation, "Victoria, I really don't have much time. So if you really have something to say it. If you don't, you can close the door on the back side." "I was going to say that Sarah was flirting with the gym teacher," Victoria blurted out, "but that's unacceptable. Wouldn't you agree?" "Really?" grinned the director. "I have a completely different piece of information." "Yeah, but also, the tea party is." Victoria suddenly felt like a schoolgirl who had come to tell on a classmate, and she was angry with herself. She regretted coming here, but there was no retreat. What did the tea party have to do with it? Selena asked, perplexed. She knew exactly what this poisonous, and as it turned out, jealous lady had in mind. But to use the leadership in her intrigues? No, that was out of line. "He who wants results allows means," Celine mentally quoted the classic. "And in love and war all means are good. But is it love or war? I think it's the latter, but maybe I can prevent a war. I'll tell you what, Victoria, said the principal tiredly. It's not right for a teacher to gossip like an old woman, let alone try to involve me in it. It's low and immoral. Well, morality is not for you, and it seems that you judge others from your own bell tower too. But I'm not at all. I'm not done yet. She raised her hand. You want to outdo Sarah? Go for it. At least organize the same tea party. I'll let you in on a secret. The parents loved it. Children need to be socialized, and you, as a teacher, should understand that. And another thing, it's not my policy to single anyone out, but if I find out that you're poisoning this girl, I'll give you a life. Any questions? No, Victoria muttered dejectedly. That's fine. Go to work. After the teacher left the room, Celine immediately felt like using an air freshener. This is so gross. And such people go to work in schools, the woman thought sadly. For what? And what did she expect when she came to me? Victoria's visit threw the director off balance, but Selena Vladimirovna had a work plan waiting for her. A couple of hours later, another conversation about Sarah took place in the school. But it wasn't as emotional, but it was more savory. John and 3 other 11th graders who were friendly with him were drinking in the gym teacher's office. Actually, they could get a lot of trouble for that kind of misbehavior, but if you did it smartly, it would all be covered. The boys won't tell anyone, and the principal left an hour ago. John checked it out himself. Guys, we got a case, he started talking. A delicate one. Delicate? Arthur asked curiously. And how delicate? Inquired Tom. I'm going to give you the gist of it, John said in a businesslike manner, and you can judge for yourself how delicate it is. Anyway, I like the new elementary school teacher. I approach her this way and that, but she doesn't notice me. Yeah, Arthur said. Well, what do we have to do? I want to look like a hero in her eyes, and you're going to help me with that, the gym teacher smiled. John's plan was as follows. His high school friends lure Sarah into the locker room and start hitting on her. Well, like a true gentleman, he saves the lady of his heart. Naturally, I owe you one, John summarized. I'm not going to do that. Nicholas, who had been silent until now, exclaimed, Is it okay if it's attempted rape? And that's a criminal offense. I don't want to start my adult life in jail. Indeed, John, Arthur agreed with his comrade. You've gone a little overboard. It's going to be fine, John said with conviction. It only seems risky at first glance. There's no risk at all. Yes, Tom grinned incredulously. We don't think so. Maybe we don't understand something though. That's just it. John was eager to confirm. First of all, you don't have to do anything. I don't have to do anything. For one thing, you don't have to do anything. Favorite girl, Nicholas grinned. Well, you don't have to tell us. The main thing is that there won't be any action on your part. And then, it's unlikely that Sarah will give this case a go. Think about it. Does she need to? She's been working here a week, and it's not like her to embarrass herself like this. I mean, the gossip's gonna start. Oh, and Victoria's bound to chime in, he thought with a chuckle. But John didn't even realize that the most interesting part of their conversation had been overheard and even recorded. The conversation with the principal had thrown both parties off balance. The teachers left the teacher's room, but Victoria remained seated, staring at one point. Alas, the conversation with the principal had not produced the result she had hoped for. I've had happiness thrust upon my head, resented Victoria. It's either me or her. Except what to do. Victoria looked at her watch, took a deep breath, changed her shoes, and took her coat off the coat rack. She left the teacher's lounge, but when she heard voices from the direction of the gym, she headed that way. No other way than with her, thought Victoria in a rage, and trying not to clack her heels, snuck to the door of her lover's office. I'm going to sketch the gist of it now. She heard John's voice, and how delicate, judge for yourself. Anyway, I like my new elementary school teacher. I approach her this way and that, but she doesn't notice me. No, not with her, Victoria rejoiced. There's obviously something more interesting going on here. Holding her breath, she pulled out her smartphone and turned on the recorder, and just in time. John outlined his plan, and there was a brief pause. I won't sign up for that. The silence was broken by the voice of one of the seniors, whom Victoria called his henchman. Is it okay if it's attempted rape? And that's a felony. The scheming teacher just couldn't believe her luck. Victoria didn't know what to do with the tape, but she felt it would serve her well. The main thing was to think it over carefully. I like her, one of the guys said in a playful voice. Such a cute little baby girl. I love them. Keep it down. There came John's warning voice. It's mine. Victoria clenched her fists, completely unable to feel her sharp nails digging into her skin. Well, let's say we agree, said one of the guys. Let's say. But how do we do it? How do we get that Sarah of yours into the locker room? The fall prom is in a week, and Sarah will be the teacher on duty that week. One of you will call her into the locker room to say something's wrong, and then the next thing you know. Deciding that was enough, the schemer walked out of the gym. Victoria took a perfumed bath and wondered what she should do with the tape. The teacher was honestly trying to figure out what she wanted to do to weaken a hated rival, or to prevent John from such dubious heroism. Both, Victoria thought. Why? She could hold John off, the boys could do their thing. Youth, hormones, and Sarah, by the way, is pretty and fresh. The seniors can't resist, and then Sarah's gonna be embarrassed. There's nothing left for her to do but resign. How about we make it look like she wanted it to happen? John wouldn't admit he put the guys up to it, or he'd be in trouble, Victoria thought. But no, that's a fantasy. I don't think anyone's going to believe it. The other option was to let Sarah listen to the tape. Or better yet, threaten John that she would do it. But after a second, Victoria rejected both. In the first case, Sarah would undoubtedly be grateful to her, but Victoria didn't need her gratitude any more than a fish needs an umbrella. Well, by blackmailing John, Victoria would make an enemy, that's all. Screw it, she thought, drying herself off with a big fluffy towel. I'll act on circumstances. The autumn ball was always eagerly awaited. It was a large-scale event, which, like the New Year's tree, was organized in 3 streams for elementary school, middle school, and high school students. The next week promised to be a busy one. Sarah had to be the teacher on duty, which I think I can handle it, Sarah replied. That's fine, nodded the vice principal, and winked at her. Yes, smiled the girl. The fall ball was scheduled for 6 o'clock in the evening. At 17:45, the hall and the corridor were crowded with dressed-up teachers and school children. Both were chatting merrily in anticipation of a fun celebration. Many took pictures. Duty is duty. But on the occasion of the fall ball, Sarah had bought a chic outfit, a coffee and milk-colored tea pantsuit. The elegant suit beautifully set off her brown eyes and hair the color of ripe wheat, gathered in a high, intricate hairstyle. Flesh-colored shoes on a massive platform and stiletto heels made the girl taller. What can I say? She was good. You look great, complimented John. You should be on the cover of a fashion magazine, not a party girl. Is it just me, or are his eyes roaming strangely? Thought Sarah, feeling a slight prick of misgiving. She tried to chase the bad thoughts away, but she wasn't very good at it. I seem to be getting paranoid, the duty teacher stated ironically. Well, what could possibly go wrong? The concert was very interesting, and Sarah, forgetting her misgivings, laughed at the funny numbers, applauded the artists heartily, and encouraged them. A tall, handsome boy came up to her. He seemed to be in the 11th grade. Excuse me, are you the teacher on duty? The guy asked. Yes, nodded Sarah. Is something wrong? You could say that. Over there by the locker room. Yeah, sure. I'll be right back. She reached the locker room, but seeing nothing suspicious, she looked questioningly at the guy. "What's the matter?" Sarah asked, perplexed, beginning to realize that her misgivings had not deceived her. The teacher on duty wanted to go back to the hall, but the boy unceremoniously pushed Sarah into the locker room, where she was horrified to find two more men. One of them had closed the locker room from the inside. "What do you want from me?" the girl asked fearfully. It wasn't hard to guess, but Sarah refused to believe it. Not here, where anyone could have entered. The guys didn't say anything back, just sniffled and pulled their hands toward her, pushing each other away. The guys smelled strongly of perfume, but even that didn't overpower the alcoholic odor. That makes sense, Sarah thought. They're drunk, so they've got the urge to do something. The girl broke free of the disgusting embrace and screamed as loud as she could. "Help!" One of the guys made an attempt to clamp the girl's mouth shut, but the wrong guy attacked. Sarah bit him and shoved him away sharply. "You scum!" hissed the high school student. "Well, now I'll count all your teeth." "Help!" screamed Sarah again at the top of her voice. Julia, the school janitor, didn't like holidays. The shouting, the noise, and then you have to clean up after them. It was no secret to the old woman that the students and quite well-behaved looking female students were not averse to having a beer, wine, or even something stronger in a secluded corner. It was a young thing, of course, but the prospect of cleaning up their vomit didn't appeal to them. But this time, it looks like something really out of the ordinary happened. It's not every day you hear cries for help, not on school grounds. So well dozed off, thought Julia grudgingly. The elderly cleaning lady liked to take a nap in the building, waiting for the end of a disco or a teacher's corporate party. But apparently, this time it was not to be. Armed with a mop and bucket just in case, Julia headed toward the locker room, where a woman's scream was coming from. The old woman ran briskly to the hall and, knocking on the locker room, asked sternly, "What's going on here? Help, please." She heard a pleading female voice say, and the locker room door swung open. To Julia's amazement, the new elementary school teacher came out. She was sobbing and shamefully covering her torn blouse with her hands and a black eye. "Oh my God!" exclaimed the old woman, and without thinking long enough, she kicked the first person who came to hand in the head. "For what?" asked Tom with a hiccup. "Not enough," exclaimed the cleaning lady. "I would have added more, but now everybody's so gentle. Anything goes straight to complaining. And what are you doing, you wicked? And don't think you'll get away with it." Footsteps were heard from the direction of the assembly hall. The holiday concert went on as usual. John sat closer to the exit, and Victoria sat nearby. After a while, the gym teacher left the hall, and she followed him. "Don't like the concert?" Victoria asked with a smile. "Why not?" shrugged John. "The concert is quite decent. Just a headache." "Clearly," Victoria coquettishly mouthed, fixing her hair. Shouting was heard from the direction of the locker room. "Victoria, didn't you hear anything?" the PE teacher asked. "No," she replied nonchalantly. "But someone's screaming." John wouldn't give up. "What's the dookie teacher for?" "That's the thing. That's what she's yelling." "Oh, come on. Not a little girl," Victoria pointed out. "Victoria, it's her first time on duty, and on a holiday. Sarah's a new person." John exclaimed. "You're such a..." Unable, apparently, to find the words, the gym teacher strode toward the hall. "John, what else?" John asked, annoyed. "Don't you realize that Sarah might need help? And anyway, stop hanging on to me. You're cheap. Do you get it? You're cheap." John quickened his pace, but Victoria kept up. "What do you want from me?" the gym teacher exclaimed, turning around and stabbing her ex-girlfriend in the eye. She argued and covered her face with her hands. "Did you get it?" quit John and staggered onward. "Got it," Victoria thought, "but he who has the last laugh." And she, anticipating a big show, hurried after John. The gym teacher was in a fighting mood. Well, now he would prove to Sarah that he was a worthwhile option, and then, there she stopped the enemy. Julia proclaimed triumphantly when she saw John and Victoria. John was stunned. When he realized that his plan had failed miserably, the gym teacher slumped helplessly into one of the chairs. "I called the police too," the older woman said, and John finally snickered. Victoria looked at him with interest, and it was a truly pathetic sight, isn't it? The gym teacher tried to say something, but didn't finish. The quiet boys stood aside. Law enforcement officers arrived about 15 minutes later. "So, what happened?" asked already in the office, courtesy of Selena, the investigator. Sarah and Julia told it like it was. "Attempted rape?" suggested one of the staff. "No," Nicholas exclaimed. "We had no intention of, raping her." "And what were your thoughts then?" asked the investigator. "I'd be glad to hear your version." "All the more so, guys, you understand. This is a serious matter." The guys understood. "So this, we are not ourselves," hesitantly began Artur Tikhonov. "Yes," Tom confirmed. There was a knock at the door. "May I?" Victoria asked. "I have important information about the case. The boys really had nothing to do with it. It's a real mystery." The policeman splashed his hands. "Well, not exactly nothing to do with it," the teacher clarified. "But, by the way, what happened to your eye?" The investigator asked mockingly and added with a chuckle, "Were you also, tried to be raped?" "No, I was not attempted rape," replied the teacher, "but let's get on with it. I have a tape recording that proves the innocence of these guys." "Well, play your tape." "Wow," Selena exclaimed. "This school is a hotbed of organized crime." "Yugu," nodded the investigator. "Well, then invite the organizer of the crime." The principal stepped out into the hallway and asked one of the crowd of curious people to get John. "And he's nowhere to be found," someone said. "Then find it." There was no way for him to leave. An employee was standing at the entrance, the investigator noted. "Well, we'll wait," sighed the policeman. "It's a montage," exclaimed John indignantly when he was presented with the tape recorder. "Yes, she was hitting on me, and when I blew her off, she decided to get revenge." "Well, the examination will show whether it's a montage or not," the investigator grinned. "In the meantime, I have a question for Victoria. Did he do the black eye too?" "Yes," she nodded. "Because she was hanging all over me," shouted John. "So you don't deny it?" "She was hanging all over me." "You're such a shit," Victoria said contemptuously, "and you can't take responsibility for your actions." At that moment, Sarah suddenly felt sympathy for Victoria. What a human being, she thought of her colleague. But that was just the beginning. "Sarah, I'm sorry," Victoria said as they stepped out into the hallway. "Stupid. Anyway, I'm sorry if you can." "Already forgiven," Sarah smiled. "You're really good." Selene was of the same opinion. "Come on." Victoria was a little embarrassed. "What did I do?" "It would be awful if the guys were brought in for nothing." "Yes." The principal shook her head and turned to Sarah. "How are you?" "It's fine now," she replied. "Are you sure?" "Selena, why don't I take Sarah's shift?" Victoria suggested. "What's her shift now?" "Well, I'm all for it." The principal nodded. "Sarah, really go home. I'll call you a cab right now." "Thank you very much." She thanked her colleagues. A couple minutes later, the police officers brought John out of the principal's office, handcuffed. John gave Victoria a hateful look, but she defiantly turned away. "I'm releasing the guys on their own recognizance," said the investigator, "but your employee will have to come with us." The phone rang from the teacher's lounge. "Sarah, the cab's pulling up," the principal shouted. Looking out the window, the girl did see a car with a lighted checker. "Well, I'm off," she said to Victoria with a smile-happy detachment. "Good night." As Sarah settled into the back seat of the car, she suddenly heard, "Good evening, Sarah." "Good evening," she replied confusedly, and recognizing Mickey, her student's father, as the driver smiled warmly. "Good evening, Mickey." Sarah fell silent, remembering the man's middle name. "Mickey," he smiled, correctly interpreting the girl's silence. "I thought you had another job," Sarah said, remembering that Mickey's parents' information had listed him as a sysadmin at a bank. The man confirmed. "I work part-time here. That's what a single parent does. It's what I do." "You're a wonderful father," the teacher smiled. "Cindy's been talking about you for years. You wouldn't believe it, about you too," laughed Mickey. "Oh, really? Seriously? And what did Cindy say about me? Unless, of course, it's a secret." "No," he shrugged. "Cindy said you were a good teacher and a good person." "Well, that's good to hear." In truth, Cindy had said something else, but Mickey didn't want to say anything about that, so he moved on to another topic. When Mickey met Catherine, he felt like the happiest man in the world. 6 months later, the young people decided to get married. A month later, Ekaterina proudly told Mickey that she was expecting a child. "Catherine, I adore you," exclaimed the happy father-to-be. "And I you." The young woman smiled gently at her husband, and then Cindy was born, and the young parents happily immersed themselves in caring for their baby girl. The daughter was 2 years old when Catherine became pregnant again. Mickey really wanted a son, and God heard him. The ultrasound showed that they were having a boy. It seemed that happiness would last forever. The pregnancy was difficult, and Ekaterina began to have serious health problems. Doctors unanimously insisted on terminating the pregnancy, but the future mother did not want to hear about it. After all, the child was already living, breathing, with a beating heart. The labor started early. "Prepare for the worst," the doctor said, and still Mickey hoped for a miracle. But alas, newborn Robert's first cry coincided with his mother's last breath. Catherine was only 25. The baby was born weak and was placed in a cuvette. 2 days later, on the day of Catherine's funeral, his little heart stopped beating. He must have sensed that his mother was being escorted to her final journey, Catherine's inconsolable mother said bitterly. After losing his wife and son, Mickey became distraught with grief. When he learned that his son was gone, the young widower went to church and placed candles for the repose of Catherine and Robert. Then he approached the face of Jesus. "Why?" Mickey asked desperately. "Why did you do this to me? Why did you take Catherine away from me so soon? Why did you take the baby away from me?" "God sends a man as many trials as he can bear," someone behind him said quietly. The man turned around and saw the priest. "Yeah, but it's so cruel." Mickey shook his head. "I'm a widower with a 3-year-old daughter in my arms. My wife wanted to give me a son, and she bore him at great risk to her health. And today, Robert was gone." And the widower wept bitterly. "You have someone to live for, my son," the priest said affectionately, and added, crossing Mickey, "Go to your daughter. She's waiting for you." Cindy asked when Mommy and her little brother were coming. That same day, Mickey explained to the girl that they were in heaven. "Will they come to visit?" the little girl asked, her eyes wide open, and her father envied her heartily. After all, in the incomplete 3 years of age, a person is not able to realize and accept that the person is no longer there and will never be. Therefore, grief as such is not felt. "No, they won't be able to come visit," sighed Mickey. "Do we go to them?" asked the daughter. "Yes, Cindy, one day we will meet them, and we'll be together. Hopefully that won't happen for a while yet," Mickey thought bitterly. Although, from now on, he had to learn to live without Catherine and the son he had been waiting for. It wasn't easy, but Mickey managed, because he had the powerful incentive of a young daughter, Cindy, his princess. Mickey worked as a system administrator in a bank and earned a good living. But he wanted his daughter to have the best of everything, so he went to work as a taxi driver. My daughter grew up to be a smart girl, and with every day by day, she became more and more like Catherine. She pleased her daddy as best she could, Cindy enjoyed participating in the kindergarten matinees, drawing them together and signing each family portrait, May and my favorite daddy. The girl learned to read at the age of 5, and every night she read poems and fairy tales to Mickey. Cindy did her chores playfully, which delighted the adults. Catherine, too, learned early to do all the housework, Grandma Leslie said one day, and the eyes of the poor woman who had buried her daughter filled with tears. When Cindy went to school, she suddenly started asking her father if he wanted to get married. What? Stunned Mickey. Why the sudden question? It's just that one day Grandma Leslie said you're still young, and you need a woman, the daughter explained. He nodded. I see then. Maybe Cindy fears that I'll get married, have a baby, and I'll love her less, suggested Mickey, and hurried to reassure his daughter. I'm certainly not planning on it anytime soon. I mean, we're good together, right? The daughter's answer struck a nerve. Okay, nodded Cindy, but I wish I had a mom. Our teacher, Sarah, is so nice and beautiful. I wish I had a mom like that. Mickey remembered a short young woman with long hair the color of ripe wheat and kind eyes, like Catherine's. She's really pretty, he thought suddenly. When Mickey arrived at the tea party, he realized he was missing. This was the kind of woman he wanted to live his life with. Sarah's soft voice was mesmerizing and enveloping, and as she poured tea from the large samovar, Mickey's breath caught. It looked so homely. Unexpectedly, the man imagined how he and this beauty was sitting on the terrace of his country house and drinking tea from the samovar. Well, aren't you an idiot? Mentally, he scolded himself. Sarah is my daughter's teacher, and besides, such an attractive woman must have someone else. No matter how hard Mickey tried not to think about her, the kind, smiling face with the radiant brown eyes kept popping up in front of his eyes. And when he saw Sarah, when he took a cab to her daughter's school, his legs suddenly felt suspiciously woozy. A stray thought suddenly flashed through his mind. What if it's fate? As they drove and chatted about everything, Mickey felt as if he and the woman had known each other for years. They hadn't. It seemed to him that it wasn't the first time they'd been in his Renault, and Sarah wasn't in the car as a passenger. As a spouse, Mickey thought, and the thought gave him unparalleled pleasure. There's my house. Sarah pointed to a blocky 9-story snake building. Mickey hated to part with the charming passenger, but he couldn't help it. Being a man who could make the best out of any situation, he remembered that he had Sarah's cell phone number, and now he knew where she lived. Isn't that something to be happy about? In the morning, when Mickey went to the car wash, he found thin velvet gloves in the car. Friday night is a hot time, and a lot of women have traveled in the car, including women who have been drinking. They tend to forget their cell phones, bank cards, and everything else in the cab. But Mickey was somehow sure that the gloves belonged to Sarah. Anyway, it was easy to check. While the young washerwoman finished Mickey's iron horse to a mirror shine, he dialed the number of his daughter's teacher. Hello, he heard a soft, melodic, and so welcome voice. Good morning, Sarah, he muttered with a smile. Hello, she replied politely. Here's the thing. Anyway, I found these beige velvet gloves in the car. These wouldn't happen to be yours, would they? It's very possible. There are some, but I'll have a look. Mickey prayed to God that Sarah would turn out to be the owner of the gloves, and he heard him. You know, guess, said the girl. All right, Mickey didn't fudge a bit. So here's what we'll do. I'll come over in an hour or a little later and give you your stuff. All right, it's a deal. After waiting for the car to be washed, Mickey drove to the house where the lady of his heart lived. I'm dreaming, you idiot, he told himself. When Mickey pulled up, he dialed Sarah's number. I'm in position, he said. Well and fine, replied the girl cheerfully. Go up to the 45th apartment. We'll have tea. Is it comfortable? Hesitating slightly, Mickey asked. Well, if I'm offering it, it's convenient, laughed Sarah. I should thank you somehow. Looks like the lady is free, he thought gleefully. He should not, however, have jumped to conclusions. What could be the matter? What if Sarah wanted revenge on her lover or even on her husband? Mickey got out of the car, but he didn't go to the driveway, but to a small store on the side of the house. He bought a small cake, a bunch of bananas, and a box of candy. As he left the store, Mickey saw a flower stand. Just what we need, he thought contentedly, and walked resolutely toward the kiosk. After buying a pretty bouquet of roses, complete with small white florets, Mickey strode into the driveway. Sarah was setting the table for tea, but for some reason everything was falling apart, and the guest had disappeared. The girl caught herself thinking that it would have been nice if he hadn't come at all. And to hell with the gloves. Not much value. But just as Sarah was finishing the thought, the doorbell rang and she ran to open it. Mickey stood on the doorstep with a cake, a bouquet of roses, and a bag. "This is for you," he said with a smile, holding out a bouquet of roses to Sarah. "Thank you," the girl smiled back. "It's a very beautiful bouquet. Come into the kitchen." "Oh well, you shouldn't have spent so much," exclaimed Sarah as Mickey pulled candy and bananas out of the bag. "Of course you should have," he objected. "It is a crime to go to such a beautiful woman empty-handed." They sat down to tea, but the conversation was not going well. They were both too excited and didn't know what to say. "Do you live alone?" Mickey broke the silence. "With her parents," she replied, though they were away at the moment. "Did you go on vacation?" "No, a symposium. They are not ordinary doctors, but PhDs." "Oh, how?" He stretched out respectfully. "Cool." "I don't know," Sarah shrugged, "but I hadn't really thought about it. Maybe because I've been living with it since I was a kid." "Who are your parents?" "My dad's a trolley driver. My mom works in a bakery." "Sarah, can I ask you a question?" "Yes, of course." "I apologize wildly, but is it a fashion to put the dress, on the wrong side?" Looking around herself, the girl saw that she had indeed worn her house dress inside out and blushed like a cancer. "How good she is when she blushes," thought Mickey admiringly. "I'll change now," she said, apologizing. "For what?" inquired the guest. "Well, I don't know." Suddenly both of them laughed merrily. "You know, it looks good on you," Mickey said with a laugh. "Really?" smiled Sarah. "I'll change anyway. I'll be right back." "Don't?" Mickey asked, and sitting down beside Sarah, pulled the girl to him and kissed her, shyly and hesitantly at first, like a 7th grader, and then bolder. Sarah snuggled up to him, as if this wasn't the first time she'd kissed him. She breathed in the scent of Mickey's perfume, and she felt better than she'd ever felt in her life. "Isn't this the good fiancé Grandma was talking about?" It flashed through her mind, because it all fits. "Sarah," whispered Mickey, "you're my good, beautiful, desirable." It sounded so intimate that the girl was frightened. It doesn't add up. She besought herself. "By the way, he is the father of a pupil, and I am behaving, not like a teacher, but like a straight girl." Sarah resolutely released herself from Mickey's embrace and nervously ogled herself. "Sorry, those," he muttered. "Yeah, I shouldn't have." "It's okay," the girl muttered. I'll go change the dress." "Yeah, sure." Sarah walked out of the kitchen and went to change her dress. "I seem to have lost my head," she mentally stated, "for good." And Mickey suddenly pictured Sarah changing her dress. His throat went dry, and he realized that he could barely contain himself from following her, and if Mickey did, he'd be in trouble. He sipped his cooled tea and was relieved when he heard Sarah's footsteps. "More tea?" she'd offered, trying to act as if nothing had happened. "Ah, no thanks, I should probably go." They both remembered the purpose of their visit in the hallway when Sarah came out to see them off. Mickey reached into his pocket and pulled out his gloves. "I almost forgot," he smiled. "Then you'd have to go back," Sarah remarked. "Yes," Mickey whispered, and without realizing what he was doing, he started kissing the girl. She didn't think to resist, but the ringing of the doorbell brought them both to their senses. Sarah opened the door and, after saying goodbye to her guest, let Angelica in. However, commented her friend on what she had seen. "Let's go to the kitchen," Sarah tossed. Noticing the signs of a feast, Angelica said, "I see you're not wasting any time." "Oh, it's nothing." Sarah waved her hand. "It was just a cab driver. I'd left my gloves in the car, and he brought them back. So I thought I'd thank him." "Thank you?" Angelica asked ironically. "Thank you," she nodded, served him tea, and gave me a passionate kiss. "What makes you say that?" "Oh, Sarah, I've known you too long to be wrong about anything. Your freaky look alone is enough." And the disheveled hair, the puffy lips, she winked. "Angelica." "Angelica what?" "I've been Angelique for 23 years, but I'll shut up. And if you give me tea with raspberry sprigs according to your grandmother's recipe, I'll be as quiet as a fish." "Don't be silent like a fish," Sarah smiled, "but I'll give you tea. I'll even give you a piece of cake. That's what I mean." Angelica exclaimed approvingly and settled into the spot where Mickey had been sitting the other day, until he started kissing her. "So you have something with him?" Angelica asked. "Pardon my curiosity, of course, but I'm allowed to." "I don't have anything with him," Sarah sighed. "But you wouldn't mind?" "Oh, Angelica, I think I'm in love to the very cannot," she admitted. "But there are some not that the obstacle, but—" "Sarah, my head is spinning. I haven't seen you in a few days, and you're having the time of your life." "It sure does." Sarah nodded and told her friend about what had happened at the fall ball. "That's news," Angelica marveled. "The genie has been detained." "Yes. Serves him right. He won't litter the wonderful atmosphere of the biker club with his rotten person. We say hello to you, by the way." "Thank you, them too. By the way, would you like to come over today?" "Why wouldn't it be?" "That's great. And bring your boyfriend with you." "What kind of boyfriend is he to me?" "Well, not a boyfriend, it will be," Angelica said with a shrug, "but something tells me it's only a matter of time. And as you know, I'm almost never wrong." "And I've never been so passionate that you weren't wrong this time either," Sarah said quietly. "It's gonna be fine. Well, the fact that he's your student's father is no big deal. But it's like, immoral, you mean?" "For the life of me, I don't see anything immoral about it. Where there's true love, there's nothing immoral. And I'm sure that's the case here. There's a reason you haven't needed anyone for so many years." The friends sat around for a couple more hours and then went to a biker club in the evening. Sarah felt like she belonged this time, and it was a great feeling. She had been given the nickname B. "You have honey-colored hair," Chippy noted, "so I think the nickname B is just right." "Why?" smiled Sarah. "I like it a lot." "You know, Sarah, I actually called you here for a reason." Angelica smiled slyly and turned to her lover. "Chippy." "What?" "Nothing," she pouted. "Do I have to?" "Well, I'm sorry," said Chippy, who, as it turned out, was called Victor. Angelica's boyfriend's last name was Chipovsky, hence the pseudonym. "All right, brothers and sisters," Chippy proclaimed, "Cindy and I have decided to get married. Everyone is invited to the wedding." The club's regulars applauded wildly, and then the exclamations began. "Well done. That's news. Cool. Love and advice. You guys are such a great couple." Bitter. When the excitement around the upcoming marriage had died down a little, Angelica remembered John, better known in the club as Genie. When they heard that John had been detained, the club members unanimously decided that he should go to jail. They didn't get home until morning. Sarah fell asleep with her head barely touching the pillow. On Monday, she learned that John was facing jail time in all seriousness. "What can I say?" shrugged Sarah, wanting to show himself as a hero. He ended up showing his true colors. "I couldn't have said it better," Victoria approved. "God, I was such a fool." "Clinging to an illusion." "Come on," said Sarah. "We all make mistakes, and you are no exception." Sarah, why don't we go you? A co-worker suggested it. I'd love to, she replied sincerely. From that date on, the colleagues became good friends. Victoria was only 2 years older than Sarah, so it was not surprising that they had a lot in common. After work, they'd go to the same cafe, where John had tried to invite Sarah, and sometimes they'd go shopping. And when she finally moved into her grandparents' apartment, Victoria went shopping with her and helped her pick out dishes, linens, and decorative details that were pleasing to a woman's heart. Victoria, I have a favor to ask of you, she said on the eve of Angelica's wedding. And what's the request? My high school friend is getting married the day after tomorrow, and I haven't picked out an outfit. Why don't you help me? No problem, Victoria smiled. I'll freshen up my closet. In the end, with joint efforts, the girls chose an elegant, shimmering wine-colored dress. It should be matched with matching shoes, a friend remarked. I think so too, Sarah said sadly, but there's no money. And it's still a week away from payday. I can borrow it, Victoria said. It's kind of embarrassing. Stop it. It's uncomfortable sleeping on the ceiling. The blanket falls down. You'll give it back when you can. I assure you, you won't embarrass me. I've got a darling who's given me some money. Sarah knew that her friend was dating a wealthy man twice her age. According to her friend, the man was divorced. Maybe I should borrow money from Victoria if she's offering, thought Sarah. Then I'll be very grateful, she said. That's a good girl. You see, she's uncomfortable. The wedding of Angelica and Victor, aka Cindy and Chippy, was being celebrated in a rented mansion that had once been a merchant's estate. Wow, thought Sarah when her friend told her where the wedding would be. That's a lot of money. But as it turned out, Chippy could afford more than that. He was a successful computer programmer. As Sarah and the rest of the guests left the registry office, she was called out. At first, Sarah thought she was hallucinating. The voice that called out to her sounded suspiciously like Mickey's. Sarah, a voice called out, and she turned around. Hallucinations were out of the question. Osipov was very real. And there was a smiling and dressed-up Cindy standing next to him. Sarah, do you know Uncle Victor too? The student asked. I know a little, she nodded with a smile, and I'm actually a friend of his fiancée. Are you a friend of Uncle Victor's fiancée? Cindy was pleased. Yeah. After that meeting, Sarah and Mickey had been strictly business. She thought it was for the best, but at night she wanted to howl. And now, Mickey stood in front of Sarah and looked at her fondly. This is really fate, she thought, not even realizing that her lover was thinking the same thing. The marriage party approached them. Is everything all right? Angelica asked. I see you've already met my brother. With a smile, the groom turned to Sarah and winked at her. By the way, he's free. He's your brother, the friends exclaimed in unison. Well, yes, shrugged the happy newlywed with a smile. Why? Come on, Angelica said, and the newlyweds went to the wedding limousine. Sarah, Mickey, I'll see you at the mansion, Victor said. Do you remember her? Sarah asked. Honestly, no, shook his head Mickey, but should he? You bumped into her at the door that day. Okay. How are you guys doing? Okay, nodded the girl, having moved to a new apartment not too long ago. You bought an apartment. What's the money for? She asked with a chuckle. I don't know. I hear they give teachers some kind of preferential housing. Maybe, but I've only been working at the school for 2 months, so it's out of the question for now. Daddy, can I take a picture with the bride and groom? Asked Cindy. Go, replied the father with a laugh, and when the girl had withdrawn to a respectful distance, confessed. I've often thought of you and remembered our kisses. Mickey, don't? You have to. During that time, I realized I didn't need anyone else. And maybe I'm being presumptuous, but I can't believe you haven't thought of me. But Cindy, Sarah, when I said that Cindy was bugging me about you, There was one thing I didn't mention. Mickey held a meaningful pause, and Sarah, realizing she was about to hear something important, didn't interrupt. Cindy said she wished she had a mom like you. She was so stunned she didn't even notice the bride, groom, and Cindy beside her. And you're still on you? Exclaimed Angelica in amazement and laughed. We need to fix this right away. That's easy, smiled Mickey. Sarah, are you really going to be my mom? Cindy asked. Well, it's too early to talk about that, the teacher smiled. Well, I think it's just right, said the bride. The main thing is, try to catch the bouquet. Well, now let's mount up. I'm as hungry as 100 wolves. Well, I don't know, Sarah, Victoria said. I don't think anyone would judge you. When two people love each other, it doesn't matter who is who or who is who. And Selena is a wise and understanding woman, and she'll be happy for you. Sarah had been dating Mickey for a month and was afraid that her co-workers would find out about their relationship. However, Victoria, like Angelique, assured her that there was nothing awful about it. You haven't been in the smoking room today, Sarah said. And I'm not allowed to now, my friend smiled. Victoria, is that what I think it is? Victoria nodded and her eyes brightened. And Harvey, as soon as he found out, proposed to me. That's great. I'm so happy for you. Sarah exclaimed and hugged her friend. When are you? No marriage proposal has been made yet, she said. I'm sure it will, Victoria assured him. It was a few days after the conversation between the friends. Mickey came to see Sarah and told her that he had been offered a good place in the capital. Career prospects with all that entails, the lover told her, and Sarah's heart snapped. What about me? Sarah, will you come to Washington with me? Mickey asked. And as what? What do you mean who? He snorted. As my wife, of course. Sarah, marry me. Saying these words, Mickey got down on one knee and pulled a cherished red velvet box out of his sweater pocket. Yes, replied the girl, and tears of happiness spurted from her eyes. It's been a year. Remembering how Catherine's second pregnancy had ended, Mickey was very worried. Since the day Sarah had informed him of her pregnancy, he had forbidden his wife to lift anything heavier than a kitten and had been blowing dust off her. Despite his mother-in-law's assurances that the pregnancy was progressing perfectly and that there were no unpleasant surprises, Mickey was afraid. I wouldn't survive if something happened to you and the baby, he said. But everything went perfectly, and on New Year's Eve, Mickey and Sarah became parents of an adorable, sturdy baby boy, whom they named Sam. On January 6, Mickey picked up his wife and son from the maternity hospital. They celebrated their first Christmas in the capital in a close family circle, Mickey, Sarah, and Cindy, who was delighted with her little brother. The baby was sleeping serenely in his crib, and the girl did not leave his side. It was very touching. Cindy seems to enjoy being a big sister, the young mother remarked. And that's great, my husband whispered with a smile, because we're going to have more kids, right? What about it? Sarah smiled gently at him, and Cindy would be an example to them in all things. The couple laughed quietly and clinked glasses of baby champagne, which Mickey drank in solidarity with his wife. They both knew this year would be a happy one.